Okay, we ready to get started? Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the sixth meeting of the Independent District Commission, and a big hearty welcome to commissioners and members of the public. Today is Wednesday, May 3rd, and we will be here from 6 to 9 p.m. via Zoom and also in person at the Portland building downtown. I am Commissioner Lumley, serving as co-chair for May through June. Our other co-chair is Commissioner Hanson, who we'll hear from soon. Before we get started with our meeting, I want to take a moment to welcome back Autumn Carter. Autumn will continue to help us and will facilitate the rest of our IDC meetings. Thank you, Autumn, and welcome back.
Thank you.
With that, we'll pass it off to the city staff who helps with our Zoom meeting logistics.
Hello, everyone. Just going to take a moment to go over some Zoom logistics with y'all. This meeting is being recorded for later viewing. A copy of the recording will be posted on the IDC website. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning, ASL, and Spanish interpretation available. To access Spanish interpretation, please click on the globe icon at the bottom right of your screen and select Spanish. To access closed captioning, click on the CC button at the bottom right side of your screen. And just a reminder to commissioners, please change your Zoom chat settings to everyone so folks listening today can follow along with your conversation. And community members listening in, we have the Zoom Q&A feature available. Feel free to submit questions or comments through there. We may not be able to answer all the questions today, but they will become a part of the meeting record. And at today's meeting, we will be taking verbal public comment, but you can submit public comments through our comment form online on our website or by emailing districtcommission@portlandoregon.gov. If you are joining our meeting today in person at the Portland building, there's staff in person that can help you access interpretation. And with that, I will pass it back to our co-chair to go over tonight's agenda.
Thank you, Adam. Can you go to slide 3, please? Before I review the meeting agenda, I wanted to take a moment to remind folks and members of the public of where we are in the process and highlight a few key milestones we have coming up. On June 1st, we are scheduled to release first draft district plans for public comment and public hearings in July. As a reminder, the voter-approved charter requires the draft district plans to be released 1 month before the first public hearing in July, which is currently scheduled to begin on July 5th. Including our meeting today, we have 3 meetings this month. The goal is to agree on a draft district plan or plans to release for public comments and hearings. The May 31st meeting will be a work session with no public comments, and that is when we are scheduled to vote on the plan or plans that we release. Working backwards, the next few meetings are crucial in our process as we need to make substantive progress in order to meet our milestones. We may need to schedule another meeting this month if we don't make substantive progress. Myself and co-chair Hanson will be working with staff and our facilitators to ensure that over the next few meetings that we can meet our milestones. As we have our meeting, please keep this context in mind. Before we proceed, are there any comments or questions about this slide before we move on to review the agenda? Looks like we're good to go. Next slide, please. Thank you, Adam. For our agenda today, we'll begin our meeting with commission business and then spend time taking public comments. After public comment, we'll dive straight into the iterative map making process with Flow Analytics. Alex will report out on commissioners submitted maps. Commissioners who submitted maps will be asked to share more about their maps and what they consider as they made their map. After our map discussion with Flow Analytics, we will take a 5-minute break. When we come back from break, we will have a discussion about our mapping considerations. The objective for today is to identify map preferences and considerations. It would also be nice if we could clarify how many maps we might want to release for public comment at the end of the month. Are there any questions about the agenda before we proceed?
How many commissioners have submitted maps we're going to discuss tonight? Approximately.
That would have to be something that the staff could answer. I know it's not all of them because I haven't submitted a map yet.
I think Alex just went off mute. Yeah, I see him nodding. He's going to confirm for us. I think there were some last minute submissions too.
I'm counting right now. I got one. About 6 commissioners submitted maps, but we're going to be going through about just under 15, but that's because there's some iterations of maps, but I'd say about 6 commissioners submitted maps.
And to jump in, we did a lot 2 minutes per commissioner, not 2 minutes per map. Just keeping that in mind, we'll try to keep that pretty standard. And we'll talk a little bit more in that section about how we'd like to approach this that section overall. But it's really to help to inform the discussion. You're not pitching maps. It's really to help start to get the group's kind of collective thoughts and really start to narrow in and focus in. And we didn't set an order. We'll ask you to volunteer, and we'll have a queue for commissioners to present on their thoughts, their thinking, and what informed their maps. So, Commissioner Saxena.
Yeah, I have some comments on another commissioner's map. Could we each have 2 minutes in that case? If we're commenting on the same map?
Sorry, 2 minutes. Can you clarify? Is it 2 minutes per commissioner to respond, or 2 minutes to just discuss the map as well, or something else?
Commissioner Chisholm and I are he's presenting a map, but I have some additional comments on the creation of that map. So we're kind of co-presenting.
I think it would be appropriate to go ahead and have conversation after each map is presented. That'd be fine.
Agreed.
What you're basically saying is, when I present my map, don't filibuster for half an hour. Got it. Okay. I mean, I'm capable of doing that if you want me to.
And I'm going to talk fast, knowing that I only have 2 minutes.
Yeah, we'll try to, we don't have to, cut you off, because we do want to make sure that we have robust discussion. It's more so to guide the discussion, make sure that we're touching on each map and allowing for approximately equal discussion around them. But if we also are starting to coalesce around concepts, and we'll let that happen and let it develop naturally. Does that sound workable as a structure?
Seems to me, I mean, if it's six presentations times 2 minutes, that's 12 minutes, but there's an hour on the agenda. So it sounds like a great conversation.
Perfect.
Like conversation's appropriate. Are there any other questions about the agenda? I think we're ready to go ahead and proceed then. Autumn, I think you're taking it over from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Coach Allen. And perfect. So we're moving on to commission business. We have a few items. So there are no excused absences today, and the minutes will reflect attendance as usual. So we do have one set of minutes to vote on, to review and approve. I know there's a question about the April 19th minutes. Those will be ready to approve in the next meeting. There was an administrative issue, but we will have those. So today, this is 2 meetings back. The minutes from April 10th are available on the website. I'll just open it up. Is there any opposition to approving the minutes as they exist, or are there amendments? Commissioner, and just as a reminder, we're using the raise hand function, the button, to queue up. So if you'd like to speak, let's use the raise hand function. Okay. And do I see a motion to approve? Seeing no motion to amend. Commissioner Siegel?
Yes.
Nice. And do I have a second?
I second.
Commissioner Fleischman. Okay, seeing no opposition, April 10th minutes are approved. And we will move on to an update on the community engagement work group's progress, and Commissioner Lorente will be presenting on behalf of the group. Commissioner Lorente.
Yeah, hello, fellow commissioners. Good evening, Portland. So the community engagement work group had its 3rd meeting last week. Reminder that all commissioners are welcome to join that work group. We had a really robust conversation that touched on the 4 points you see on the screen here. First, point of discussion was around the engagement tracking form. So just a gentle reminder and ask to fellow commissioners, as you're in community and having conversations about the commission's work and the mapping process, and you're getting feedback from folks, please be capturing the content of those conversations in the engagement tracking form. In case you missed it, the form has been sent out to us by staff. I believe there's an email last week from Sophia and from Adam the week prior, which has a link to the form as well as the, the password and things like that. So the form itself is very simple. It's a who, when, and a summary of what was discussed, and would be a very valuable point of consideration for the rest of us on the commission to kind of consider and weigh that feedback. So everyone is welcome to also email staff, read out to the conversations you're having, and we can staff will capture that information in the form as well. And a little later in the meeting, when we hear about some of our community engagement numbers, that will also include a report of what kinds of engagement has been captured in the form to date. A second point of discussion from our work group meeting last week was around the stakeholder outreach list. So staff sent out a list of community stakeholders and asked that commissioners review that list to add anyone who might be missing, any organizations that might be missing, and to update contact information for folks on that list who may have changed roles or made different moves like that. And also there was an ask for commissioners to sign up for organizations that we can commit to doing personalized follow-up outreach to. So I just want to express appreciation for everyone who has taken time to update information on the spreadsheet. And as a reminder, commissioners, please identify 5 groups on that stakeholder outreach list who you can reach out to. And please sign up for those 5 folks no later than Friday the 5th. The third point of discussion was around hosting a community listening session. So we'll be having a listening session on May 15th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. via Zoom. And that session will begin with a presentation of the IDC and our work to date. And participants will be led into breakout rooms and participate in facilitated discussions around communities of common interest. So we have received, we'll be receiving help from volunteers to help facilitate those breakout rooms and capture notes. And discussions will be centered around the 4 community questions that the community engagement work group put together. The session will be virtual, and we would like fellow commissioners, if you're available, to please attend that if you can. And if not, staff will give us a report of key themes emerging from that session at the May 17th meeting. Lastly, we talked about, there's been conversations about the accessibility of Districtr to community members. So we are also going to be hosting a series of Districtr trainings, which will be held twice a week during the month of May. There'll be one weeknight at 7 p.m. and also at Fridays at noon. Adam will be leading these trainings and showing Portlanders how to use the Districtr tool, and attendees will also be given an opportunity to fill out a survey with the 4 community questions that I referenced earlier. And summaries on the answers to those questions will also be shared out similar to the way that we receive public comment reports. And commissioners are not required to join these meetings, but it, of course, would be nice. And before I hand it back to Adam to give us a report out on our community engagement numbers, just want to open the floor here for other commissioners who are able to participate in the work group to add or amend anything that I've shared here, and then also take questions from the rest of the commission as well.
Just double checking. Are there any questions for Commissioner Lorente or other members of the group? Okay, seeing a few. Commissioner Fleischman, we'll have you go first, and Coach Johansson, you'll follow. Commissioner Fleischman.
Yeah, thanks. I was just wondering, I don't recall whether part of the plan is to do outreach to local media to publicize these activities, whether it's local television, public other publications and media. And if so, kind of how and who will be doing that, because that's a little bit of a big lift.
Sorry,
commi-
and now I muted myself. Man, I'm having struggles today with the mute button. Yes, absolutely. Paid media and hopefully an earned media strategy is part of our communications and engagement plan. So city staff will be creating, especially around the public hearings, we'll be creating ads and we'll be putting those in English publications, but as well multicultural publications. And we're lucky today that we have our charter transition manager, their PIO, listening in as well. So I see him nodding.
Commissioner Hanson, you're a member of the work group. Did you want to share additional information?
I did, yeah, I will, and I can respond also building on what Sophia said just now. Commissioner Fleischman, if you have ideas or capacity or interest in additional earned media strategies, please let us know, because we would love to uplift that. Commissioner Lumley and I are working on, we're like outlining an op-ed that we may try to get placed. There have been recommendations also in prior meetings of like community specific outlets. So if you have specific recommendations of like newspapers, blogs, podcasts, whatever, I would say send that probably to Sophia and or Adam, and perhaps loop in the community engagement work group or Commissioner Lumley and me, and because that yes, that would be great. And then the one other thing that I wanted to underscore from Commissioner Llorente's fantastic recap of the community engagement working group meeting is this stakeholder outreach piece. As we've discussed in previous meetings, everyone on this call has deep relationships and deep community, deep networks like across the city of Portland. And we know how much of an impact an individual and personalized invitation to comment can make. And so just like underscoring, please do review that spreadsheet. If you can sign up for more than 5, please sign up for more than 5. There's a template email attached to Sophia's latest email to like really personally invite folks in the many, many ways that we have to give feedback to extend that invite. So just like underscoring that is an ask for everyone on the commission.
Thank you, Commissioner Hanson. Commissioner Chisholm.
Yeah, I was going to say that certainly I would think that the local media, such as it exists anymore these days, would look at this as news. Particularly, I think the moment is when we, at the end of May, when we have some maps for folks to look at. I can imagine an Oregonian or Willamette Week or Tribune story that sort of outlines various maps and it invites folks to comment. And I'd be happy to help work on a media outreach strategy. I trust the city PIO is well organized, but I'd be happy to help if that's helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay. And thank you to the community engagement work group. Adam, I know that you're planning to share some figures that help to quantify reach so far. I'll hand it over to you.
Yep, that's right. Let me just advance us here. And for anybody wondering the numbers, here's a breakdown of some of the engagement we've been doing to date. You can see on the screen here, the number of people receiving our monthly email updates is now up to 137. We have 103 public comments received about the Independent District Commission, or sent to the Independent District Commission on districting and maps and such. The most popular, of course, is the maps. People love making maps. And since we launched the District R tool, we've already had 126 maps submitted, which is just great. And great work on Alex to summarize those for you as well in the last meeting and this one. We've offered 2.5 hours of verbal public comment so far in our meetings and have had 9 public meetings and or hearings since we kicked off, including engagement work groups. We've had 427 folks total across those 9 meetings attend in either virtually or in real life, but definitely more folks virtually. We've so far had one community event that had 7 folks show up. That was one of our District R trainings that we held last night. It was a good time. Definitely recommend folks check out a District R training if you're following along at home. The community question survey that the community engagement work group created the questions for and we put out to the public, we've received 26 responses from, which is not too shabby since it just went up last week or the week before. And the stakeholder conversations, the forum that Commissioner Lorente was gently reminding you about earlier, we've had 7 of those filled out, and I'll look forward to y'all sending many more of your conversations along to us. And that is our engagement by the numbers. I can pause really quickly for any questions. All right. No questions. I'll just keep moving along here. We're now going to take public comment. Community members had the opportunity to sign up to testify in advance on the District Commission's website. We are first going to call on the folks that have signed up, and if we have time left on this agenda item, we will open it up to anyone else who would like to testify. If you're in the Zoom, just let us know with the Q&A function. If you're in the room, I can't see if there's anybody in there, just let Sophia know. If you hadn't, and you can use the raising your Zoom hand as well. When it's your turn to testify, we will actually, if you're in the Zoom, we will elevate you to a panelist. You'll get a little request that says, would you like to become a panelist? Just click yes on that. You'll then be able to speak in the meeting, and you will have 3 minutes to share. Please manage your own time. There is a timer on the screen. And if you are testifying in person, please find the District Commission staff, Sophia, and they will call on you. And Sophia, I think that you have the list of folks open.
Yes, thank you, Adam. So the first testifier that we have today is Terry Harris. So Terry, you should be getting a notification right now. Then we have Richard, Walter, and Corinne. Did Terry make it in the room?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Sorry, I lost you for a second. Let me
Yeah.
get your timer going. Go ahead.
Okay, the cool part about this is I get 3 minutes and all of you commissioners only get 2 to present a map. So the map I want to talk about is 180211. It's actually the one that you had as your sample map number 2 at your last meeting. And I was kind of psyched to see that you took a look at it. So that made me want to kind of explain it a little bit tonight. Because, if you do your districtor, it's very easy to paint 4 districts on the map of Portland. That's an easy thing to do. And you can balance your population pretty easily. But I'm trying to apply some principles to it, and I want you to listen to some of it. I have a couple written comments into you from April 15th and 22nd with details about that stuff. And so some principles that I used, it's taking advantage of the multi-member districts. And I think that's really important to consider as you're doing your work here. And it also takes into consideration what East Portland is, how big it really is. East Portland, I think, has the opportunity to elect 4 multi-member council members if you map it using multi-member district considerations. And then the other thing I did is to make sure that you don't have stranded neighborhoods. So when the West Side district has to fall over onto the east of the river, you don't strand little neighborhoods over there. You use multi-member districts to give those cross river districts political power so that they can participate more fully rather than feel left out as an appendage on a district created in a district or map. So those, and it features also a central district. And I think if you're going to pack a district, don't pack an East Portland district that's been underserved forever. Pack a central district that has had representation forever. And that's where the representation comes from. They'll be well represented into the future, but my district that has a West district, a Northeast, and a Southeast, and a Central district will give much more opportunity. Fully half of the council will come from neighborhoods that have not been represented. I use neighborhood boundaries because I think that's important. And I'm running out of time, but I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Terry. Richard, if you're up next, but we can't see you in the room, so if you're under a different name, let us know. So we'll go with Walter next. You should already be in the room.
Any questions for the folks who testify or no?
Autumn, do you have a preference?
We have it has been allowed. I think we should probably keep it to a minimum as a standard. We have had 1 or 2 questions, I believe, in the past to a speaker, just usually for a point of clarification. So if there's a question around clarification.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Harris, I just wanted to understand what you meant by not stranding a neighborhood, across the river. You talk about Selwood in particular. What do you mean by not stranding?
Well, I mean, exactly that is take Selwood, for example. During the campaign, I campaigned against the measure, but I went to a community district meeting in Selwood, and they were worried that they're going to be part captured into a full Western district, that they'd be the one Eastern neighborhood connected to all the rest of west of the river. And they have 13,000 or so residents. Now, if you put a community of 50,000 across the river, that's fully a third of a district. In a multi-member district, you get that you can elect a council person with 25% plus 1 of the vote. So it allows a bigger North district. And I put some community of interest maps of these non-stranded districts into your community of interest public gallery or whatever to see how that looks. But I think that's important for the crossing the river problem. And it's probably just as important in other neighborhoods too, but that's the obvious one.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fleischman and then Commissioner Lumley. Commissioner Fleischman.
Mr. Harris, thank you for your ongoing engagement with us and your really thoughtful contributions. I just wanted to expand, I think, on Commissioner Chisholm's question and change your focus from kind of concerns around Westmoreland to go north to North Portland. If we're looking at the map, if we're looking at the right map, I believe that North Portland, St. John's, for example, is included in a Western district. So what's your thinking around kind of if you said, well, folks in Westmoreland were concerned about being stranded or being placed in the wrong district, what's your sense about what people in North Portland might say looking at the map you've presented?
Well, it's the exact same problem, and I did it in the exact same way. If you put just St. John's into the Western district, St. John's doesn't have enough population to make a difference. But if you consider that northern section all the way up to the highway, you have 50 60,000 residents up there that could elect a council person from North Portland if they wanted to. So it's the similar situation. And in order to get both Westmoreland and North Portland in a West District, it carves out the center, and downtown matches downtown with the inner Southeast and inner Northeast. And again, I think it allows subregions to be considered as having enough political power in a multi-member district that you should be considering.
Thank you. And Commissioner Lumley, yours will be the last clarification question so that we preserve time for other presenters. Commissioner
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Harris. My question is really simple. What was the number of your map? I missed it.
Well, it was your sample map number 2, and my map was 180211.
Okay, thank
And
you.
I had some community of interests of the north and the south drawn in there as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your effort and good luck. Good luck.
Thank you, Terry. So up next, we have Walter. Walter, your floor is yours.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the time this evening. My name is Walt Weiler. I'm the chairman of the board of the Downtown Neighborhood Association. As you determine the 4 voting districts, please include whole boundaries of existing established neighborhood associations. These associations include individuals who work together and know one another, and they represent legitimate communities of interest. In addition to that, there is a natural grouping that I personally know because I work with the associations, just as an example. The Downtown Neighborhood Association, Pearl, Goose Hollow, Northwest District, Old Town, and Southwest Hills represent a community of interest that includes neighborhood associations that work together very regularly. I thank you and all the best. Time's up.
Thank you, Walter. So up next, we have Corinne.
Hello, fellow Portlanders. I am here this evening for a public comment pertaining to the districting process. My name is Corinne Frechette, and I'm a Portland resident. I work in Portland. I volunteer in Portland. I raise my children here. And most importantly, I pay my taxes here. For many of us minority foreign immigrants, our neighborhoods and neighborhood associations represent such a great sense of belonging in our new country. And it gives us a sense of belonging we might not otherwise have. I asked the Commission to employ the existing recognized neighborhood association boundaries as a basic geographic unit in assigning representative districts, and that school enrollment areas be considered an additional increment. These geographic areas represent the fundamental institutional and social infrastructure of our city and should not be divided or distorted. I oppose using precincts, census tracts, or zip codes for these reasons. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Corinne. So Richard, if you're in the virtual room, this is your chance to go, but otherwise we're done with public testimony. So if anyone else virtually who would like to testify, you can let us know by raising your virtual Zoom hand or letting us know through the Q&A, and we can promote you.
Sophia, I'm not seeing any. Okay, you don't need it. All right, so we actually wanted to open up the floor now to hear thoughts from commissioners. And also, we know that as individual commissioners who were selected in part for this body because of your connections to communities and your connections, your ability to engage across the city and across communities. We wanted to also invite you to share anything that you've been hearing with the commissioners, and also open that up as an opportunity to hear from, one, to reflect on public comments we've just heard, comments that have come in written form, and also comments that have occurred in the prior weeks, as well as what you're hearing individually. So we wanted to just take this up as an opportunity to reflect on what you've been hearing, how it's resonating, and there may be any themes that you may be putting together. We'll start with Commissioner Kimura.
Now I have to take my hand down because otherwise I'll forget and leave it up.
It's a good trick.
Okay, what I have heard from my people that I've talked to here in East Portland is that I did explain about, you know, how you define the boundaries, and I've heard almost overwhelmingly from neighborhood associations, but also from different community groups that frankly, because we're all used to working with each other, we would prefer to stay together. So I have to take that as a real definite sign that regardless of whether you look at political boundaries or economic boundaries, the East folks want to stay together. So that's going to color how I approach this, because I assume that from what I've heard previously, people in St. John's wants to stay together with North Portland, and there is the only thing I'm going to say is in terms of the geographic boundaries and stuff, Central North Southeast Uplift has too many people, and they're most likely to get parted out. However, we should be really mindful of how we do it, and I think we can do it in a way that makes sense so that like-minded groups get together, even if they're not always in the same district with the original Southeast Uplift. One of the things that I have heard is people in the different school districts that East Portland has want to be really clear that they want to stay together. So I can't divide, at least from my point of view, I can't divide Park Road School District into two different groups. As far as they're concerned, it should all be one group along with the David Douglas School District. And I heard this loud and clear. So I just want to make sure that I've heard from the people, and while I understand what we have to do, there is some wiggle room about how we do this, and I think it's important. I did have a conversation with Commissioner Chisholm, and he and I have looked at it, and I have touted a couple of different map scenarios out, and there is very much support for us staying together. And I've got 3 more things I have to schedule where I talk to people. And I'm not actually doing a presentation. Basically, what I do is tell them, this is your chance to weigh in. Whatever language you want to do it in, whether it's Arabic or Somali, send your comments to the redistrict. They'll get it translated. And I hope that we keep track of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kimura. And also, just as a note, what you just did is reflective of what the community engagement group said it wanted to do, right? Provide different opportunities for members of the community to weigh in without necessarily having to come make a presentation or build a map. There are many different ways that members of the community will want to engage with this process, and ways that they can work with members of the commission and the commission directly to be able to articulate what community means for them. So thank you for that. So we have Commissioner Chisholm and Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins on deck. So Commissioner Chisholm.
Thank you, Commissioner Kimura. As I said last week at our meeting when you were not present, I'm very curious how you define East Portland and the folks that you have been talking to. So thank you for taking the time individually, one-on-one this past week, and thank you for your comments just now. I am very curious, though, if you would care to respond for a moment directly to the notion from Mr. Harris, who was just on here. His idea, I mean, I think we all are in, I don't want to speak for everybody. I think many of us here want to see greater representation for East Portland. Mr. Harris, in his testimony, suggested that perhaps by splitting Parkrose and the Reynolds areas, the northern part of East Portland, into one district, and the David Douglas and Centennial areas in another East Portland district, that it might be possible in our multi-member system to elect 4 East Portland commissioners. It might be less, it might be 2. So I wonder how you react to that notion of, is it more important to stay together, Or is there some value to splitting parts of East Portland into 2 districts so as to maximize potential representation? If you have a thought about that, Commissioner Kamara.
I have a thought, and that is that from a political point of view, that probably makes more sense. But in terms of the people who live here, I have to be mindful of the fact they said that's not what they feel comfortable with. And there's going to be some discussion about who goes where. But at the same time, I have to respect that their feeling is that regardless of whether it's politically expedient to be split so that we can elect additional commissioners, for the people that I've talked to, and I've talked to everybody who have been in Park Rose, as well as the people who are down in Powers Gilbert and Pleasant Valley, the staying together is more important, simply because if we were an appendage to something that was different, say in inner Northeast, we would be, they feel that we would be a smaller voice than the one big loud voice of East Portland. And I think that I have to respect that choice for the people who live here. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, commissioners. Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins, and followed by Commissioner Baldini. Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins. Perfect.
Thanks. I have to say that I've spent a lot of time on Districture, and I've created a whole bunch of different maps, and they weren't really to create maps that I was wedded to as a final outcome, but more because I wanted to understand the different choices that you make and the ramifications they have on other zones that you're trying to form. And what I kept coming back to was, I felt like there are some forest level questions that we need to discuss as a group before we start getting down into granularity of maps. And a lot of the questions have come up in a lot of the public comment and testimony that we've heard. For instance, how are we prioritizing school district boundaries? If they are highly prioritized for us, they are hard lines that require us to honor certain things over in East Portland. How are we prioritizing neighborhood boundaries? I saw a lot of maps proffered up that slice and dice neighborhoods, and they don't preserve those boundaries. So depending on where we prioritize that, we're going to be a lot more accepting of different kinds of zone creation. And this whole question that just came up in public comment about the neighborhood coalitions, there are 7 or 9 of them, however many there are at this point in the city. Again, that if we're trying to preserve those, that creates another challenge in terms of how you divide up parts of the city. The larger question about where, if we think there needs to be a West Side district, it has to cross the river somewhere. There's no way for it not to. So there are only a few, it seems to me there are only 2 or 3 places where it can cross the river and make sense in terms of a compact, contiguous district. So we need to talk about that at a higher level. And the other thing I hear a lot from folks I've been talking to around the city who live in different neighborhoods is, how are we going to think about major arterials, I-84, 82nd, 205? Because I've heard from a lot of folks that they consider those things in how they live their lives and where they concentrate a lot of what they do in their communities. And then finally, the thing I looked at a lot when I was doing the maps was, how do we look at major industrial swaths of land, which are a big part of certain zones? And should we be thinking about whether, if, for instance, you align the Port of Portland with an East Portland zone, does the Port of Portland become an asset to East Portland that they can leverage to get more access and attention in City Hall. I was just that there's not a big population there, but there's power there, and there is an asset that can be valuable to a zone. So anyway, that's my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. That was a I think that was a very helpful summary of many of the bigger themes that the commission has been wrestling with, and that you're also picking up from members of the community as well, because others are wrestling with it too. In the 8 o'clock hour, it's really 8 o'clock hour, we're going to have a fuller discussion around the mapping considerations, and many of the items that you touched upon, they serve as kind of the big pillars that we'll want to discuss as a group as we start to narrow down and focus on the strategy around what plans do we want to propose, and what are almost like these scenarios, right? These, like, if you think about them in buckets, what are the combinations of scenarios that provide viable options to the public for districts? So that was a very strong overview. I just wanted to note that as a synthesis. So, and I see heads nodding as well. So I think it's resonating with the rest of the commission. And probably to wrap us up for this section before we move into the next, we'll have Commissioner Baldini, followed by Commissioner Lumley and Commissioner Fleischman. But if someone else did want to jump in, I think we can make time to. Commissioner Baldini.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to comment on a couple of things. First, the question of whether or not that fourth person in the Northeast hypothetical district would pay attention to the East. Based on my research and the data that I'm familiar with, the answer is no. So we should not make an assumption that there would be this fourth person who would pay attention to a particular area within the district. That really doesn't happen unless there is a particular area in the district that is very wealthy, then we do see disproportionate attention. Or if there's a particular area in the district that has very unusually high voter turnout, that is a particular area that a representative can say, I know that group is going to turn out in really high numbers. So we should not assume that this fourth person would pay attention to the East based on that proposed design. So that is based on my experience and my research. The second thing that I wanted to say was, as your, resident of Selwood Moreland on the committee, I just wanted to give my experience briefly with talking with my neighbors, and it was the opposite of what we've heard so far. There is a lot of happiness about being joined with the West Side. I think a lot of the people in this one particular area of East Moreland and Selwood feel a strong connection with the West Side. That changes quickly once you cross Cesar Chavez Boulevard, but in this small area, I haven't found any who oppose that in my personal discussions. But again, we're all talking to different people, so that's one of the reasons why it's so important that we're all bringing these perspectives. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. And just the point of clarification, the hypothetical fourth person you were referencing, was this the prior discussion around the likelihood of electing potentially 3 versus 4 representatives for East Portland, right? Perfect, see the nodding, great. Commissioner Lumley, followed by Commissioner Fleischman. Commissioner Lumley.
Thank you. So I have a sort of a topic, and then I want to review 3 conversations that I've had. The topic I wanted to bring up was school districts. And I realize it's identified in our mapping tools as a district boundary, and it's even referenced as an example of a geographic boundary, or excuse me, a boundary to pay attention to in our criteria. But City Council doesn't have very much authority at all over school districts, at least not by comparison to, say, the counties. And so I'm just wondering why school districts themselves are important. And I've asked people about that, and if you dig down a little bit more deeply, they're more concerned about, say, splitting a high school in their neighborhood into 2 different areas, or a middle school or a grade school. So that seems to be a little bit more of an interest to people, but by using school district boundaries, I just don't see why that rises to a level of importance if City Council themselves doesn't have authority over that area. And so I've met with 3 folks over the last couple of weeks. I met with a representative from the Apano organization about the Jade District and other areas where the Asian community might have an interest. And I really wanted to get a handle on really where the Jade District was and what it meant to the Asian community. And it stretches between Burnside and Holgate, at least that's the business area. And down by Holgate, if you even go past Holgate and go east, where you're going to see quite a few Asian members that live in that neighborhood. And he said that in general, most of the Asian community in that area lives east of 82nd Avenue. So he was very concerned about dividing 82nd Avenue in half and wanted to make sure the whole district was included. So if I'd share that. I also met with a group of folks from my own organization, the Native American Youth and Family Center, and they would like to make sure that the northern part of Coley is included. There are some maps that show Columbia Boulevard as a dividing line, which cuts off strong interest in the northern part. I believe the Coley district goes past slightly past the Columbia Slough. They also did not want to see 42nd Avenue be a dividing line because there's a business district that goes on both sides of 42nd Avenue. They wanted to make sure that was included in Coley. There was also discussion about the Lentz neighborhood. Maya has 2 housing properties out there. The Lentz neighborhood is a very interesting neighborhood. It goes on both sides of I-205. And we also heard testimony from, might have been somebody from the Lentz neighborhood that wanted to make sure their neighborhood was kept full. They also had strong support of not dividing the Jade District, to want to keep that whole. I met with a couple of representatives from the Latino network, and they identified an area of interest that is from Coley neighborhood going sort of going east to Sumner and Park Rose. There are several housing developments and apartment complexes that house a lot of Latinos in that area, so they were had an interest in keeping that together as one area. Identified that whole area, Coley, Park Rose, and Sumner, are a food desert lacking public transportation. It has a mixture of housing and agribusiness. And in particular, they believe that there might be new affordable housing development planned for the future in this area. And they asked that I meet with a representative from Hacienda CDC, which I will do. Mentioned that most of their Latino businesses are east of 205. And maybe made a comment that the one community center they have, which is over by Mall 205, is not very accessible to their community. All 3 of the groups that I met with were willing to host a public hearing in July. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lumley. And just as a note, the staff has taken a note of the different organizations that have volunteered to potentially host as well. So if you also know of other organizations, some broader call out to the commission that might be willing to host, please do not hesitate to put us in touch. Commissioner Fleischman, followed by Commissioner Manjarrez and Commissioner Saxena. Commissioner Fleischman.
Yeah, thank you, Autumn. First of all, thank you for your facilitation and asking clarifying questions. I really appreciate those. So as I think that what I'm going to say it kind of supports the thread of the conversation so far, beginning with Commissioner Kimura onward and everything I've heard. But as I reviewed the notes in the public and the public testimony, including those maps and the conversations, I reflected on the tension between drawing what we might call fair maps, or maps that do justice to our criteria, and what might be seen by some as social engineering, which is trying to get to a certain outcome by kind of putting in too many different considerations. And And I saw this in the maps, particularly. I saw that tension in the maps and the exposition of the two folks who have submitted some very thoughtful maps and testimony. Both I'm going to use their first names, Hank and Terry, of both who are kind of in dialogue, but somewhat in conflict in their points of view. And it just reminded me that in the end, we could spend a lot of time trying to over-determine things, as opposed to getting kind of to fair and just, to a kind of a fair and just map drawing, because we don't know what the outcomes are going to be beyond walking away and saying, we did a good job drawing the maps and we heard voices and we try to incorporate all the public voices in there. So because I'm always uneasy about doing stuff I've never done before, I try to study up a little bit, and I went and I read around communities of interest, the communities of interest entry in the ACE Electoral Knowledge Network resource, which it was created by the United Nations back in 1998, and is an international resource it's an election knowledge base. And there were things that struck me, because I think we're trying to figure out kind of how we're going to think about communities of interest. And there were a couple of things that stood out from what the authors wrote in that entry. They wrote, redistrictors knowledgeable about local conditions can sometimes identify communities of interest, but more often these communities are identified through a public hearing process. So I really appreciated what Commissioner Kimura said, what Commissioner Lumley just shared around the variety of conversations we've had, that's what's going to, as opposed to us kind of determining what our communities of interest, we're going to need to kind of draw up maps and then let communities of interest tell us what they think of those maps. And again, just to complete this, redistricting criteria inevitably conflict with one another. The authors write, one possible means to resolve a conflict between criteria is to determine the most salient or most important community of interest in a given instance. Public hearings are essential to this process. For example, a redistricting plan that follows ethnic community boundaries rather than administrative boundaries may prevail if members of the public assert that ethnic community boundaries are more relevant to them than administrative boundaries. And there was something in that I read that I think echoes what Commissioner Kimura said around, well, there may make sense in this, looked at from this perspective, that, we would draw the map this way, but she reported wanting to be responsive to what the communities she'd heard from said. So I just wanted to add this in, Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins. I feel like that went a little bit from the forest, a little bit into the clouds, but I wanted to add a little bit of that perspective also.
Thank you, Commissioner Fleischman. I also want to thank you for upholding one of the commission's values, is knowledge sharing. So it's a really good example in action. So thank you. Commissioner Manjarrez, and then followed by Commissioner Saxena. And Commissioner Saxena, you'll probably wrap us up for this part of the conversation so we can move into the maps. Commissioner Manjarrez.
Great, thank you. And I'll be very brief. I just wanted to come back to this engagement form, and I apologize. I've been tracking, but I think today is probably the first time I've had an opportunity to really sit with it. And I would really appreciate, I had mentioned like deduplicating it in certain areas, because I want to make sure that we're respecting folks' time. So I'm looking at some of the leaders that are listed multiple times, and I think making sure that we have commissioners reaching out, like we're respecting their time and being thoughtful about how we're reaching out to folks, I think would be really important. So making that sort of a living document and having staff sort of deduplicate in as much as possible, but also I think Commissioner Lumley just modeled really well too. Like sometimes folks don't have that form filled out, but as we're hearing either through public comment or as folks are sharing who they've had conversations with. Like I put like 3 folks in there that I'm going to take out because Commissioner Lumley has already talked to them. So it's not necessary for me to go around. So it would be really helpful for me to figure out where I can fill gaps, since we have overlapping relationships, but also, you know, various relationships where we can fill those gaps. So that's my first request, I think, is using that form as a living document and just encouraging folks to look through it before we add folks in the stakeholder list, because I saw folks added multiple times there as well. So that was the first piece. The second piece is I really appreciate what Commissioner Fleischman just said about for some of these communities, it's going to be easier for folks to give feedback if they have something to react to. So some folks who have a broader view within the institution, I'll use Lee Pocha from ERCO as an example, right? So he is responsible for the immigrant, he's the head of the Immigrant Community Refugee Organization, and Africa House, a lot of these different organizations are part of ERCO, and he has the broadest view. And so he might be one who can sit and say, like, here's how I would slice and dice, but many folks within the organizations aren't going to have that expansive view. They're going to know their specific community, but if you put a map down or put something for them to respond to, they can at least draw it. And it's an orienting document. So as we're doing this work around engagement and the form, and just, again, so much appreciation for the folks in the work group who are putting together these tools that we can work with. Thinking about this as sort of a rolling process, I think would be really helpful too. You know, there are leaders at this point that we should absolutely be engaged with early on. And then there are folks later who, you know, we might be wanting to do outreach with certain maps. So I think that was my big request. It's just if we could use that as a whole commission and maybe reference that document, you know, in our conversations, I think that would be really helpful so that we can identify where we are missing voices and missing perspectives. I guess the last thing I will say too, to that last point about criteria and how we land on the first set of maps, or how we sort of get to some decisions, to Commissioner Van Sickle Robin's point, is that I think part of the process we have here is that we have a lot of data, and we're holding a lot of data in our heads, and each of us was selected because we bring a particular lens, right? So Commissioner Lumley is, again, a great model and example. I've had these conversations, I'm continuing to have these conversations. Here's what I'm putting on the table, and here's sort of the lens I'm bringing. And I think Commissioner Kumar did the same thing. So I think we have what we need in this room at this moment to land somewhere in terms of what are the first set of criteria, you know, that we can agree to as a set of however many individuals we are, so that we can have something that we can agree with and take to the community for folks to react to. So I think part of it is we should always be gathering data, but I think we should also trust in our perspectives and what we're bringing to the table at this point, and sort of take on that sort of responsibility of setting the foundation, understanding that it's going to change over time. But I think having us, and, you know, Adam, I'm really glad you're back, facilitating us to a space where we can get to some foundational pieces would be really helpful, I think, for outreach. So just wanted to say that I trust everybody in this room to come up with a foundational map that is not going to be perfect, but it's going to be something we can use to get to something better. So just my appreciation to everybody.
Yeah, and thank you, Commissioner. And to just as a reminder too, you'll have June, so the maps will be in the kind of like the public sphere for discussions among community and among commissioners in the month of June. In July, there will be the series of hearings, 2 per district, right? And the maps that you put out as the potential district plans will not necessarily be those that you'll end up voting on. You also have the month of August to deliberate around, to process what you've heard as a body, and to come to a final kind of agreement on which maps you'd like to move forward with. So just as a reminder, that was obviously for your benefit, you all know, but it was also for the benefit of members of the community who are watching too, to understand the process and just know that this isn't the end, right? What we're approaching is a milestone, and it's a work in progress. So thank you, Commissioner Manhattan, for bringing that together. And Commissioner Saxena, if you want to wrap us and close us out.
I do, and I'll be brief. I just wanted to report on a couple of folks that I talked to as well, who also kind of aligned with some of the things that have been said, but I'm not going to repeat those things, but rather add some additional information. I talked to folks who work very closely with the Multnomah Youth Commission. I have not talked to youth as yet, but folks who work with the Multnomah Youth Commission. And one of the things I heard, similar to what Commissioner Lemley said around, particularly with East Portland, around people not wanting to split high school boundaries, that both Parkrose and David Douglas each only have one high school. So with respect to geographically smaller school districts, those school district boundaries, are something to think about. I also heard, similar to what Commissioner Manjarrez just said, that youth are very likely to want a map to react to, that once we produce some maps that the folks on the Multnomah Youth Commission will likely want to come forward to comment on maps that are, something to react to. I spoke with someone who has been very involved with the East Portland Action Plan, similar to Commissioner Kimura. And in addition to everything that the commissioner said, and that Commissioner Baldini also added some nuance to the experience with Multnomah County District 3, where there's East Portland plus portions of kind of central, inner, southeast, has been that the more western portions do tend to dominate that district, and that folks are having kind of a less of an experience of being able to organize and to bring forth East Portland voice in a district where that contains both East Portland and some more inner neighborhoods, such as Mount Tabor and other neighborhoods in that area. And that also the experience of having been recently annexed to the city of Portland was critical, because in the process of annexation, East Portland neighbors had to, for example, pay to connect to city water. There were decades of disinvestment just decades of not having city services prior to annexation. And that is a common experience that East Portland has, that makes, that causes there to want to be sort of a singular district. That experience of being annexed and not having access to city services until the 1980s or 90s, which also makes it more, it makes it harder to organize, and also harder to have infrastructure built because of the kind of the lack of existing infrastructure. If you want to build, for example, a sidewalk, you have to build the infrastructure to support the sidewalk before you build the sidewalk. So that is a consideration that causes East Portland to possibly be a community of common interest. So that's something that I heard as well about that experience of being next. So that's all I've got. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you to all of you for sharing those reflections and reflecting on the comments that we've heard as a group as well. And also thank you to all of the residents who took time out this evening to share their thoughts with members of the commission, and those who've submitted comments in writing as well. So thank you. So we are going to continue. We do have a 5-minute break scheduled for at the end of this discussion. Just wanted to preview that for you. Right now, I'll pass it to Alex from Flow Analytics, and Alex will be synthesizing the maps that we've received and including maps from the commissioners. And then as part of this discussion, this is where we'll if a commissioner would like to present, or commissioners would like to co-present on just maps they've been working through, this isn't a pitch, it's more of a way to visually and process and discuss kind of some of these bigger themes, and then to just kind of react what we said members of the public are going to do too, right? To help stimulate a reaction and a discussion. So we'll move into that. As a reminder, approximately 2 minutes per commissioner, when we'll allow for discussion with each map. For Alex's portion, we'll ask that you hold questions until after Alex is able to present and walk through things. But if you want to note them in the chat, we can use that function as well. But we'll take questions afterward. Okay, Alex, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to pass it to Kimmy right away, because she's going to go over the synthesis of the public submissions from Districtor, and then I will go over the maps that were submitted by commissioners.
Okay. So I'm just gonna, oh, can I share my screen?
Let me see if there's a. You try now.
Okay. So I'm going to just do a very brief kind of overview of what we saw coming in on Districtor and sort of some of the patterns that we've seen. So this is just simply an overview of the criteria in case you would like to reference that later. So we did receive over 100 maps on Districtor submitted to date. We've been analyzing submissions that include all 4 districts. So if we have some of the maps were not complete or they just didn't have 4 districts, and so we've not been analyzing those maps in particular. And also we've been analyzing and drawing down the maps that are sort of completed and not the works in progress. So if you have a map that's sitting in works in progress, you should publish it, and so that we can pull those down as well. If there are any maps in Districtor that you'd like to see us talk about in more in depth, please just send us the map ID number and we can do that. For communities of interest, less than 10 have been submitted, so not a lot. I think that may shift once we get to publishing some draft maps from the commission. And those communities of interest can be viewed in the online mapping tool that Alex provided. So we saw effectively 4 map patterns come through with all of the maps in Districtor. The 4 district with 3 touching sort of the southern swath of the city was the most popular. And then there were several maps with 1 sort of central district in the middle and then 3 districts surrounding it. What we referred to as sort of a pinwheel of districts where most of them sort of touched somewhere in a mid central point. And then there were some maps that were submitted that had sort of north-south or east-west bands running through them. So the 4 districts, almost half the maps that were submitted fall in this category. And so this is sort of an example of one individual, I'm assuming, just because of the naming convention with the maps, who submitted 6 different maps with varying iterations of primarily around the border areas here that you see circled in red. And so this is really just an example of ways that folks can use Districtor to draw a map that's similar to one another, but with different iterations and sort of different areas of division. So we have 6 more maps that follow the same pattern. I did not pull down all 40+ maps to show you tonight. So that's, this is an abbreviated sort of overview. But these are also great examples of how the same map pattern can result in very different looking districts across the board. So the next one was sort of the maps with a centrally located district with 3 surrounding districts. There were 10 maps that were submitted following this pattern. And you see they're very different sort of shifts in where the central district is located and what areas of the city it touches. This is just 4. And then the last 2. The next one is the sort of the pinwheel pattern. We had 9 maps that were submitted with this pattern. You can see it very clearly sort of in the central points where they all meet. Then another few iterations. Some of them were not exactly pinwheels, but we felt they were sort of close enough in that pattern. And then the bands. We had 14 maps submitted under this group. So you can see they run sort of the gamut from being completely across in an east-west direction to sort of being a little more towards the traditional 4 district pattern that we saw earlier. This map has different colors because it was actually submitted under a community of interest. But because it was a complete map, we included it in this presentation. And then there were these maps. And I think when we talk about the criteria and sort of the functional pieces of the criteria and how they play out in maps, I think that was, we had a robust conversation internally about this particular area and whether or not it was met all of those criteria. So I think that it's a good example of the possibilities that are available to the public and to the commissioners to take a look at. Okay. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Kimmy. And actually, before we jump into questions, there was one point of clarification. The maybe maps are from Commissioner Lorente. So
Okay.
evolution in the thinking. Yes. Okay, perfect. So I'll let you, Kimmy, if you'd like to call on folks. That's how we usually do it, but Commissioner Lumley, see a hand.
Well, thank you. I actually wanted to comment about the maybe maps.
Mhm.
I think they're good examples. I went through and counted all the other maps that have similar configuration where there's 3 districts that all touch the southern part of the city boundary. And I'm not quite sure why the example here is all from one person, but I didn't want people to think that because one person can submit a whole bunch of maps that are similar to each other, that it's some kind of a democratic process. That's not what we're doing here. These are just samples. It's not, I'm not encouraging people to submit a whole bunch of maps that are all the same.
No, and they were not actually all the same. They had variations between all 6 maps, nor did I realize that they were all from one commissioner, or I might actually have not used them. I was trying very hard to stay away from any maps that Alex was going to be reviewing. And so we were comparing notes a little bit on some of that, but so.
But I do appreciate Commissioner Lorente's maps though. Thank you.
Commissioner Chisholm?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll echo Commissioner Lumley's note there that our process, of course, here is to come up with a map, use our best judgment and so forth. We're not, this is not a quantitative, let's go look at all the maps and come up with some quantitative median. So anybody out there thinking of that public gallery as a ballot box, please don't go stuffing it. I do have one question actually for Kimmy or maybe Alex. There have been some maps, particularly the ones that tend to split the west side, that I've seen that look contiguous if you're looking at the splotch of paint. But could you explain actually for me the requirement that they be connected by a transit link, or I assume that means a road? If you have a district that is contiguous geographically, but there's no way to drive from one place to another, is that actually contiguous? Does that meet the qualifications?
So, and Alex, I'm happy if you weigh in as well. I think that there is contiguity in terms of does the district physically connect to the rest of the district? And then there is what I would refer to as a functional contiguity, and which is sort of what you're talking about in terms of, can you get in your car and drive, or can you get on a transit line and go from one part of the district to another? And so I think that it's something for the commission to consider when you're looking at communities and at maps about whether or not things are necessarily accessible. They sometimes appear to be accessible on maps and sometimes they're functionally not. So,
and so what I hear you saying is it's not a hard legal requirement, but something we should strongly consider.
Yes, you do want, it does need to, I mean, yes. And also I would say that you want to be sure that there is both the physical and the functional contiguity. And I think you'll hear that probably from communities, that if you have a district that people can't get to from one side or the other. So
I have no doubt we'll do our best to make that work.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, just to be clear, contiguity is important here. But it's something we might have to take a look at specific cases. This is a good slide. I know it's a little small, but the map in the top left-hand corner there, you see how the orange or yellow district kind of goes up onto Skyline there. there is, you know, Cornell goes from northwest and gets up to that area, but it does have to very technically go outside of the city of Portland just a little bit. So I would say that's kind of a gray area. It's not having to travel through a different district, but it's something we'll be keeping an eye on when we analyze these maps.
Commissioner
And-
Lumley? Oh, sorry.
Well, I was just going to jump in and say, and if there's a legal question, if there's a question around legality or bounds in that sense, we can have the city attorney weigh in on that too. If there's specific questions. So maybe we'll follow up. Or Commissioner Chisholm, if you wanted to jump in right now.
I don't think we need right now to get a legal opinion. But you know, if we do end up with a map that has that kind of a feature, we'll probably want to do that.
Yes, if at any point there are questions around just something you're wrestling with and the legality of it, we do have that resource. I just wanted to remind folks of that too. Okay, and sorry, Commissioner Olney.
Oh, you're on mute, Commissioner.
Did it again. Thank you. I'm not quite sure if this is the appropriate time to comment on the themes, but I do have a few comments. Is it appropriate to comment on it right now? Okay, then, so looking at the pinwheel districts, it sort of forces the east side to be split up and also the west hills. And we've heard a lot of comments, and all the comments I heard from my interviews, they all want to keep the east side as one unit, one district. And then we have the Willamette River, which is a major geographical feature. So in terms of how we proceed tonight, this might be an example where we as a commission can say that we are probably not going to produce a pinwheel map at the end of the month. And that might take a whole section of these maps sort of out of the equation. And I also have similar concerns about the bands, examples of the bands, the way it forces parts of the city to be divided up in a way that doesn't feel natural and doesn't feel like it represents the values that we've heard from public comment or from people that we've been talking to in the community. So those could be two areas that we might decide, oh, you know, maybe we're not going to proceed in this area, and we can look at some of the other sections. And, you know, the themes that we have here probably aren't the only themes out there, but they're the ones that were a good representation of what we've seen so far. And looking at the maps that show the central districts, that also appears to be, at least most of them, forcing unusual creations of maps where it divides the east side and does strange things with the west side. When based on what we've heard so far, the configuration that in the first group, the first theme where we have three districts that all touch the southern portion of the city, that might be the area that this commission might be focusing more on, because it shows the greatest likelihood that we're going to have some maps that would represent the values of the city. And also the criteria that we have to work with. Thank you.
Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins, I think.
Yeah, to follow on to what Commissioner Lumley said, I also think that as I pulled up a lot of these maps and tried and then overlaid neighborhood boundaries or overlaid school districts on them, they start to fray because they don't preserve those. And so I think, again, as we try and say if preserving neighborhood boundaries is going to be high on our priority list, if at all possible, then all of a sudden a bunch of maps go to the wayside because they violate that in many respects. So again, I just encourage us to not just say, to actually have some specific reasons and rationales for why some of these may not seem to satisfy the criteria that we're focusing on as we look at these maps.
Thank you, commissioners.
Can I just add one point? I know my hand's not up right away, but
Go for it.
going back to the school district boundaries, you know, I can appreciate the comments about David Douglas and Park Rose and so on, but Portland Public School District is huge. It is not possible for us to keep Portland Public School District whole. So, and the same with some of these neighborhood boundaries, they cross over communities of common interest. So it's not going to be possible for us to keep all neighborhood districts whole. This is, I believe it was Commissioner Van Sickle Robinson at the beginning of this conversation that there's going to have to be some really important trade-offs. Thank you.
Yeah, and my comment with regard to school districts was just about the little ones, not PPS. And in fact, I think there are some districts that are only partially in the city of Portland.
And thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Chisholm, do you want to round us out before we go to the presentation?
Sure. I've done a lot of thinking about the school district's question. So I thought I'd just share my thinking there. It is true that PPS is 3/4 of the city, thereabouts. But you know, for me, and maybe it's because I'm a parent of a 9th grader and I've been in the school system for a decade. But to me, schools often drive community. High schools in particular tend to be the center of gravity for families in a community. But it's also true to me that you know, as I think about, well, one thought, you know, it was said that, you know, the city doesn't run the schools, and that's true. We are not Chicago. But there is interaction between the city and the school district. The city provides police officers, the school resource officers. The city, often you'll find schools and parks next to each other, where the park becomes essentially an extension of the playground. Back in years ago, when we had some budget challenges in schools, while the city was doing well, the school district would actually turn over parks to the city, or turn over playgrounds to the city, and they'd make them parks, and the city would help the school budgetarily by taking over the maintenance budget. And so there are times when the city of Portland does help the school district. There are these interactions. And as I've been reflecting on that history, and I'll probably have city staff who will tell me I'm wrong on some level about this, but it seems that most of the conversation at city council level, when we talk about that school-city interaction, is about PPS. And David Douglas and Park Rose, which are entirely within the city, and then Reynolds and Centennial, which are have substantial portions in the city, seem to get less attention. And so for me, as I've been noodling on maps, one important criteria for me has been, let's make a district that includes David Douglas, Park Rose, Reynolds and Centennial, so that when the city does talk about how can we help our school districts, they remember that there are 5 and not 1 in the city. And with full recognition that there's also some little tiny pieces of Beaverton and North Clackamas as well. But there are basically the 5 school districts that are part of the city. And so for me, that's an important part. And it tends to jibe with Commissioner Kimura's notion of a single East Portland district. So I will stop there and I'll wait for it to show you my map later.
Thank you, commissioners. Before we move into the presentations, I had a couple of notes to comment. So Commissioner Lumley, I'm not sure if you saw, but during your remarks around just kind of summarizing what you were starting to see in the themes, the pinwheel and the bands and the consistency with the values and the objectives, the commission, there were a lot of reactions. So I know that like maybe people aren't tracking Zoom reactions, but that's one benefit to doing this in a hybrid model. So folks were sensing that there was some agreement to a lot of what you were saying. There's some resonating. So we'll kind of keep that in mind for the discussion towards the end of the meeting. And as another point for the, I did write it in the chat, Commissioner Manjarrez, you made this point in the last meeting, but if there are specific types of maps that in general, the commission really does not want to focus on and maybe wants to set aside for consideration at this point, that may help to narrow the focus of the scope. So that's also something that you may want to consider, that we'll want to consider in that discussion. If there are just certain types of maps that aren't resonating because they're just not consistent with your objectives, it is fine to set them aside. And that's not necessarily, you know, forever. It's just as you're trying to focus the group, that may be an effective mechanism. So just wanted to note that as just something to keep in mind as one, we're looking at maps from commissioners. And as you're kind of trying to get to the next milestone. So with that, do I have any volunteers? Would anyone like to start us off with talking through some of the maps that you drafted yourselves? So I'll wait for a volunteer, but then I'll probably end up calling on whoever looks the most eager.
Who were the 6 that had submitted maps that we're prepared to go over?
So I will say this, just because a commissioner did submit a map, we're not going to say that they have to do the 2 minutes of presentation, that'll be optional. But I think it's okay, Alex, if you do have a list of folks who submitted them.
I do, and I have them in a web mapping interface that I could share my screen and show that, and they're in no particular order, or in terms of importance, I guess I would just say that they are in chronological order from when I received them since the last meeting. So we could go over them that way if there's no volunteers. And also, if I could just have a couple minutes here, I was going to show just a couple things about these maps in general and about Districtr that I think might be helpful, but I can save that for later if we'd like.
Actually, let's start with the overview, and I'll let the question of volunteers steep for a minute. All right, how about if you jump in, Alex, and then we'll go into the presentations.
Sounds good. I think y'all should be able to see my screen at this point. I'm going to use this first map as an example, and it's not to pick on the commissioner that created it by any means, but I just wanted to use it as an example to talk about some of the small oddities and nuances of Districtr. So in this kind of interface we're looking here, it's should be similar to what you guys have are familiar to what you guys have been seeing, where we can go look at a map that's been submitted, but then also some of the supplemental data. So while we're going through this tonight, if commissioners, you want to call on me to—
Can you tell us what number that is?
Yep. So the nice thing about this is I'm going to be able to pull up Districtr right from there too. So that number is going to be 180449.
Thank you.
And I wanted just to point out that two to three things in particular. One of them is when you're working in Districtr, there's this handy feature down here called Highlight Unassigned Units. So when you turn that on, you're going to get some red marks here for any census blocks that haven't been assigned to a district. So if you see any of that, and a lot of times it's going to happen in these very low odd areas along a highway boundary where the blocks are really small and probably don't have any population. So it's not a huge deal. We're going to take care of that on our end. But if you do see that happening, you can fill those in. I would assume these should be blue. But we're going to leave them as is when we receive that. The other thing to note is we've talked about the population criterion of having equal population. And you can see right here very obviously that it's pretty close. But then there's this maximum population deviation number that Districtr reports out. And that's not actually the number we're trying to have below 10%. That's only one side of the story. That's telling us that the district that's most different from the ideal is 2.7% different. But we also need to know the opposite. So we need to know two things. One is the district that's most populated, and two, the district that's least populated. So we can find the two differences and add them together. That is the number we're looking for, and that's called overall deviation. And the reason I bring that up is because if you look here and you see 2.7%, well below 10%, that's great. What we're also doing is running some statistics that are helping us measure or compare to the criteria. So I have those right here for that exact map. And you'll see that my number, or the number that it produces, is actually 3.6%. That's because you see that number here like 2.5%, in districtor was 2.7. That's because of the unassigned blocks. But we have that one, but we also want to have the 1.2. So then when we do an absolute sum of those numbers, we end up with 3.6 with minor rounding there. So that's the number we're trying to get below 10% or as close to 0 as possible. The other thing I'll mention about these statistics is as we look at them tonight, if we compare them with the maps, part of this report is looking at the contiguity criterion. And we're taking these straight from Districtor and running them and not making any changes. And when districts are shown here, it's probably just because there's a small little issue with contiguity. We can look at this map and we're not having that situation of like wondering if people can drive to this area. That's not an issue. All of these are clearly contiguous by looking at them. What the report is telling us is very specifically, spatially, there's an issue, and I can see it right here. If I zoom in, this one small census block accidentally got tagged as being in the green district when I think it was pretty clear that it probably should be part of the orange one. So that's just, some blocks are really small, districtors a little sensitive. That's going to happen. Don't worry about it, because when we get down to making these potentially into draft maps that we take to the public in June, we'll make sure to clean any of those little idiosyncrasies up. That's all I have on Districtor. So like I said, I have the maps that are submitted by commissioners loaded up in this module, and I can go to any of them if there's volunteers.
Okay. Commissioner Valdini, do you want to start us off?
Yes, thank you. So I'm starting us off because this is my map we're looking at. And thank you so much for noting the unassigned population and for talking us through the true deviation. That was really helpful. I just wanted to give, using my 2 minutes, I wanted to just give a little explanation for what I base this on. Number one, as you can tell by the shape of the lines, I made the school districts my most important priority. My top priority was to maintain Parkrose and David Douglas. And I want to, I think that's a very important aspect of this map. Another priority was to keep St. John's and the West Hills separate from one another, because after speaking to members of those communities, it seemed like it would be better to keep them in different districts. Another decision that I made with this map was how I handled downtown. And I think in my conversations with people, I think this is becoming a more and more relevant question of, are we going to put the central city into one district? Are we going to divide it up? For me, I like the idea of dividing it up because it creates an opportunity for multiple voices to be heard about this very important economic powerhouse of our city. And it also creates an opportunity for compromise of, voices from the North District, from the Southeast District, from the West District. So I purposefully divided up Central City because I'm hoping that it will facilitate more voices involved and compromise. And then in order to meet the population goal, I did swing the west side across the river to Selwood and Eastmoreland using the geographic boundaries in my personal experience that are most appropriate. I also used freeways whenever I could, if I was especially in the more north areas. To me, freeways are a good way of dividing things up. So I leaned on freeways when I had a question about where a line should go. And I think that's it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any questions or just anything to highlight in this specific map? We'll also obviously have opportunities to reflect on the maps more generally. Commissioner Fleischman?
I'm raising my hand because one of the two, I have two submitted maps that I'm going to go through, and one of them I think follows a lot of the same design principles. So I was wondering whether it might be useful to, it's the one that's labeled trad 1. Whether it might be useful to pull that up to see kind of, it's a variation, it's a bit of a variation on the same theme. And again, Commissioner Baldini, I try to accomplish kind of similar goals using the Sellwood Moreland area as the completion of the Western District, and then try to make sure that that there was a kind of a significant kind of northern district. So it just looks, it's different, but it's kind of, I think, following pretty much the same design principles, and just to show that that's, I think, one of the emerging efforts is to make a map like the one Commissioner Baldini just presented, or the one or this one to try to accomplish that.
And are there any thoughts on, so Commissioner Baldini and Commissioner Fleischman, I think it's pretty clear how similar your maps are. I just want to see if there's any kind of interest in discussing the style of map, anything that stands out. If not, we can move to a next map. Commissioner Lumley. And Commissioner, you're on mute.
Did it again. The map that Commissioner Baldini worked on. I actually showed this to the Native Americans Family Center folks, because it showed the dividing line of Columbia Boulevard, and it cuts up the Coley neighborhood. And you sent an email that said, does anybody want to work with me on this map? And I kept meaning to reach out to you and just let you know that I think I like your map. I would just go a little bit more north with that section to include the other side of Coley Boulevard. You can even see Nam Family Center on the map there.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. While you were talking earlier about that, I was making a note that I want to change my map to reflect that. And I really appreciate that information.
Yeah, I was driving through there with Commissioner Hanson. It was last week, I think it was. And we drove around that neighborhood. There's homes back there too, and businesses, a lot of businesses, but there's also homes in the area too. Thank you.
So looking at splits Cully, and so a revised map would look to keep Cully more whole. Okay. Commissioner Fleischman.
Yeah, I think the map that I presented doesn't split Cully, if I'm remembering correctly. And one of the other design features, was that I tried to be responsive to what either was or wasn't representative statements regarding Montvilla wanting the desire not to be in a central east side. So you see that it's Montvilla is kind of in the easternmost district. So I played with those things to say, okay, can I preserve the neighborhoods as as they're currently designed? There were some minor places where I had just because of the way the census blocks are versus neighborhood lines, or where high school boundaries were that went into different neighborhoods, where I said if I have to preserve either the high school remains in the district or it remains in the neighborhood, that the high school area remained with the with the electoral district. But, so that's what I tried to do with those two issue areas.
Thanks, Commissioner. And I think this question is from Commissioner Sexton in the chat. Maybe it goes to the full commission. Does anyone know or have thoughts on whether Cully would prefer to be with East Portland versus North or Northeast District? And if not, that maybe is one of those kind of open questions that we kind of open up for just feedback from the public as well. Okay, and I'm
There's
seeing
two
hands
hands up.
from, yep, Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins and Commissioner Lumley.
So I have a question on this map. So when you scroll down to the southern border of the city, what happens to Lentz? So it's not in the east side. This is one of the things I really struggled with, and I had a conversation with Commissioner Kimura about this. It's very difficult to get Lentz and Montevilla in the same eastern district, because the population goes up dramatically, especially if you're still trying to keep Park Rose and David Douglas together, because then you have to cross over into Maywood. There's parts of Park Rose that cross over there, and there's no way to bring Cully in. That would just blow the whole thing up, because Cully is a very big, it's a big population neighborhood. So that's why I was saying, if you're thinking that neighborhoods are important, and if you're thinking that some neighborhoods want to be in the same zone, and I feel like we've heard so far that Montevilla, that I struggled, because I feel like we heard that Montevilla wants to be with East Portland and Lentz wants to be with East Portland. And if that's the way you're going to have to draw the lines, then you struggle with the population density in that eastern district. So that was just my observation as I was trying to draw lines. The other thing I wanted to say about Commissioner Valdini's split at Hayden Island, I spent all of my formative years in North Portland, St. John's. I went to Jefferson, and I think that you would get a lot of pushback from the people who live in the Hayden Island area if you had it separated into two zones. I think they would feel like their voice was completely going to be obliterated.
That's very helpful. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Lumley.
Thank you. Yes.
Commenting or presenting?
Commenting. I don't have a map yet.
Okay. Oh, right.
I hit the wrong tab and I lost my map. Picking up on the comment about using I-5 as a dividing line, in addition to the Hayden, I hadn't thought about Hayden Island, so I'm glad you brought that up. There's also a shopping district to the east of I-5 that's important for the St. John's area. So that there might be interest in keeping that contiguous. The question about Coley neighborhood and whether or not they see themselves as more east, I don't think they do, but it's a good question to ask. I do believe that they feel like they might be a little bit more connected to Sumner, just because 82nd Avenue it looks and feels very much like the same neighborhood, even though you cross a major road there. And then the comment about trying to keep Lentz whole. If you keep Lentz whole, then most likely you're going to cut off the lower portion of the Jade District, which has some important businesses and a fairly large Asian population that is in that area and east of that area, between 82nd Avenue and I-205. So I am going to do a map at some point, and I'm going to take that section of Lentz and make that so that the Jade District is not cut up. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And would anyone else like to present their maps, and Commissioners Chisholm and Sexton, yeah, okay. I thought you'd like to, okay, Commissioner Chisholm.
Sure thing.
And which, oh, Alex, you already have it?
Yep.
Okay, great.
That's not quite it. There it is. Yep, there we are. So first things first, on the East Portland side, I had been initially keeping Montevilla in with the East Portland district. And I actually went to Commissioner Kimura with a couple of options. Do I go Park Rose or do I do Lentz? And it seemed like it was a choice. And in the way that only she can, she said, I'll bet you can do both. And then she reminded me that the city of Portland's East Portland zone does not include Montevilla. And that's actually the solution to the question, which was to get Park Rose and Lentz into an East Portland district, you move Montevilla out. And I think that it is something that we're going to hear about and we should explore with the public. But I think it's that this is the solution that I took on this particular map. But the thing I want to focus most of our attention on here in this map is what's happening on the west side. You can cross at St. John's, you can cross at Selwood, or you can cross in the middle. And this map crosses in the middle. And the reason for that, from my perspective, and Commissioner Saxon is going to weigh in on this as well. In 1988, the city of Portland developed something called the Central City Plan, an effort to understand the densest part of the city requires different zoning and has different sorts of requirements in terms of the housing that's there. In 2015, they undertook an effort to revise that. It's called the Central City 2035 Plan. I'll go ahead and put the link to it in the chat here momentarily. But the Central City 2030, thank you. The Central City 2035 Plan is basically downtown, Old Town, Goose Hollow, South Waterfront, the Central East Side up to 12th, Lloyd District, and Lower Albino. And we put all that together here and then expanded a little bit in order to match the population. To me, that's really important to put these all together. And Commissioner Baldini and I have had a debate about that. That's great. Because I believe that this idea of making sure that the central city, the central business district comes back in our economy is really critical. And the best way to do that is to have 3 commissioners who champion it, who hold agencies accountable for achieving its goals, to support them when they're doing well. And so that when we talk about investment in the city budget process, for example, there's a focus there on it as a region and not with different commissioners arm wrestling over pieces of that region. It includes, by the way, also the upcoming OMSI redevelopment zone. To me, that's a really important piece of this whole conversation. And I'm going to hand it off to Commissioner Saxon to add an additional element to this conversation.
Great. Yeah, no, thanks, Commissioner Chisholm, and also thanks for sort of doing all that research and analysis and the work with Districtor to create the map. So as I mentioned briefly at our last meeting, I believe it's possible that renters may be a community of common interest. We're going to need to hear from the community on this as we enter into our engagement process, whether others agree with that assessment. But I wanted to go through some of my thinking on this and why I like having, sort of putting the kind of the issue of the East Portland district aside for a second, because I also really like that as well. But to focus on the central city piece of it. So there's a concentration of renters straddling both sides of the Willamette River in the central area, and that would include the Lloyd District and other kind of inner east side districts such as the Central East Side District and Lower Albina. And this map keeps those neighborhoods together that have a high concentration of renters. It also aligns with how the central city is defined by City of Portland planners and housing policy experts. And I've got a couple of other links to share as well that I use to determine that there is in fact a concentration of renters and also some characteristics about renters in the City of Portland. So there's here is a link, hang on a second, bear with me, to some data visualization that is from the PSU kind of population research center. And it's got like a number of maps, including maps that go down to the census block level that folks may want to play with. And there's another map that they've got that I kind of want to focus a little more on today. This is a dot map that overlays race and ethnicity with population density. Oh, hang on a second, I need to. Sorry, there we go. So this is the dot map, the last link that I put in there. And the number of people who are represented by each dot, like it changes as you zoom in and out, and that's reflected on a key on the last side. So you can actually zoom in and out to like the 1 person level. It's that detailed. So because you can also see race and ethnicity, so what you can see is you can zoom in and see where there are multifamily housing, because you'll see like blocks, city blocks that are just, have hundreds of folks living in them. And that's where you can see density. And you'll see, if you look at this map and you zoom in, that multifamily housing tends to be concentrated in the central city area, straddling both sides of the Willamette. And you can also see that where there is racial and ethnic diversity, it tends to be in those areas, it tends to be in multifamily housing. What you'll also see in this map is that communities of color have been displaced and dispersed to the kind of the outer edges of the city, but where you see diversity, it tends to be in the central city in multifamily housing. There's another tool that Commissioner Chisholm shared with me it's a little less intuitive to use, but it's really useful. It's the EPA Environmental Justice Screening and Mapping tool, and it's got a lot of demographic data, like a lot of demographic variables, including one that's the percentage of renters in a geographic area. And I can share with you, if folks want to play with this tool, how to determine the percentage of renters in a geographic area. But it also confirms that there is a high percentage of renters in the central city area, as defined by the city of Portland. So it's not just in multifamily housing, it's throughout the central city area. And then finally, what I want to share with folks.
When I under that zone of census blocks that are 75% or better or more renters is such that central city zone. Plus, in this map that I've designed here, it basically goes into the Buckman, Kearns neighborhoods, sort of actually crawling up Sandy Boulevard, if you will, where you find a lot of those renters there. So that's what's. We had to add population. That's what we added, was those census blocks with lots of renters.
Yes, no, thank you for that clarification. So the final link I want to share with you is the recently released Portland Housing Bureau State of Portland Housing Report. And there are, so hang on a second, I want to go over to my notes, because I'm going to read through some characteristics of renters that are outlined in this report. And there's it's a pretty dense report. Demographic data starts on page 17, data on homeownership starts on page 22, and data regarding multifamily housing production by neighborhood is on page 29. But just some factoids I wanted to pull out were that the median household income in Portland increased from $60,095 in 2015 to $73,159 in 2020. So that's a 22% increase. However, the median income for renter households was $49,643 in 2020, which is less than half the income of homeowners. And the median household income for homeowners is $103,317. Communities of color continue to experience disproportionately low homeownership rates compared to white households and the population as a whole. Rentership rates vary by race and ethnicity. So 43% of white households rent homes in Portland, while 70% of Black households, 61% of Native American households, and over half of other communities of color rent their homes. And then finally, multifamily development is concentrated in the central city. So out of 636 multifamily units produced in Portland in 2021, nearly 75% were added in Central City, Gateway, and Northwest. And Central City alone saw 293 new units added. And that was in 2021 again. So, and again, the Portland Housing Bureau has the same boundaries as the Central City 2035 plan for how they define Central City.
Commissioner.
So,
Commissioner Sexton, thank you for the links and the reports. I think one, obviously can't get into all the detail today, but I think those resources are really helpful to understand potentially considering renters as a community of interest, and being able to kind of represent that and reflect that in a draft map as well. And I know that Commissioner Hanson, I saw that you kind of noted that you do you have a map that you'd like to share. Commissioner Manhattan, do you have a comment or would you like to present a map?
I have questions and comments related to this map specifically.
Okay, so how about we go to a comment from, question and comment from Commissioner Manhattan. Commissioner Hanson, we'll have you present, and then we'll probably need to just take a short break, and then we'll come back for that final discussion to close this out. Okay, sound good? Okay, Commissioner Manhattan.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the thoughtfulness on this. I think there are a few things I have questions about, and I think some significant concerns with that particular area. My office is located in that area, so I spend a lot of time in the region. But I think the Albina Vision Trust issue, and also thinking about the revitalization efforts that the Black community in the area is hoping to pursue. So it may not be reflected at the moment, but it feels like this splits up that area a little bit, which I would be very, very concerned, and I think goes against our criteria. So I would be, it would be really important to me to hear from those specific voices about how they feel about this particular map in this version. So that's the first piece is thinking about those historic neighborhoods, but also, I mean, not just from an economic development perspective, but thinking about some of the culturally specific services and communities that are represented here. I feel like would also split them up. So I'm thinking about Kairos PDX and some of the other organizations that are in these neighborhoods. So I do have a pretty big concern, but definitely would want to hear from those communities about whether they feel like their interests would be, whether they want to be split up. I think that's the first piece, and I can't imagine they do, but I don't want to speak for them. I think the second piece is, and this is coming back to the issue related to renters and keeping renter communities together, is I would have a big concern about folks, renters who are here on the Inner East Side, their voices being overtaken and diluted by the folks on the West Side, which tend to be wealthier, whiter communities, and them losing representation through that process. So again, I understand the keeping them together, but I think making sure that we're keeping them with other like communities and making sure that we're not, it feels like we're, like, I'm thinking about all of the folks I know on the West Side here and just the variance between that. So we heard a little bit about St. John and North Portland and those folks not feeling a lot of connection to the West Side. We heard about some folks in Southeast maybe having more connection to it. I've certainly not heard from folks in that central area feeling like they have connection to the West Side in a different way. If anything, I'll just speak for myself. It's difficult to find the energy to cross the river sometimes, even for like simple meetings. So I just don't see a lot of connection there. And I would worry about the dilution of voice that would happen if that were to move forward. And then the other piece is, and this kind of goes back to something I had referenced early on about access to, services, infrastructure. I just feel like this pulls a lot of economic points of interest into the West Side. And I feel like part of what we need to be thinking about is how we're concentrating that equitably across the city. I feel like, again, we don't want West Side voices to overtake sort of economic development conversations across the city, or that would impact the whole city, and want folks to feel some connection to an investment in that. So I think there are multiple concerns I have on this, but I do appreciate I like the combination presentation. I think that I agree strongly with, making sure that renters have a voice in this process, but I'm having trouble pulling that together with sort of the West Side interests that I feel like are represented here. So we can definitely keep conversation there, but just wanted to flag those. And again, wanting to get perspective from historically Black communities who are represented multiple times in our engagement list. So on this particular idea, especially given what we've all, I'm sure seen in the news about some of the revitalization efforts that folks are going to be investing in over time. So just wanted to flag those, but thank you for the presentation.
If I could just chime in there with a little bit of a disclaimer. I submitted this on Friday. I've had a lot of conversations since the last 5 days. And I think it's a very reasonable question to ask the question about, in particular, the Lower Albina zone and perhaps also the Lloyd District zone. The premise here is to keep the entire Central City 2035 plan together in one district. And what, if you look at a map, if you layer this map with the population of African Americans in the city, you'll see that basically just north of there, the neighborhoods north of there, Boise, Elliott, King, Woodlawn, and so forth, are all kept together. Lower Albina and Lloyd District actually don't have much in the way of Black residents, certainly not the density that north of there does. However, I think it is very important and very well noted that those are the traditional neighborhoods that were impacted by urban redevelopment decades ago and are part of the new or the old historic Albina district and the new effort to invest there. And so I think it's a very reasonable question and one I'd be very open to adjusting that map so that the Lower Albina and the Lloyd district go up into that North Portland district. I think it's a good option. It wasn't the premise of this map, but I'm certainly, it's one of the conversation points I think that we're going to have as we iterate here.
Thank you, commissioners. And just as a, can I get a check? Commissioners Judd, Lumley, and Vincicle Robbins, are you looking to comment on this specific map? Seeing some head nods. Okay. Commissioner Judd? Oh, no. So can I have folks who, Commissioner Judd, I have you. Can I have anyone who's looking to comment on this map raise their hand? Or keep their hand raised? Okay. Let's start with Commissioner Lumley and then Commissioner Vincicle Robbins, because I think you want to comment on this map. Then Commissioner Judd, if you have a more general comment, we'll go to you. And then Commissioner Hanson, so that you present, we'll go to you after that. So Lumley, Vincicle Robbins, Judd, and Hanson.
Thank you. I wanted to comment on the addition of the central east side to the west side and also the Selwood Moreland area to the west side. If we keep a west side district, somebody's gonna have to cross the bridge one way or the other. I know we often see the Willamette River as an obstacle, and in actuality, it's a wonderful river. We forget that sometimes. I think that the central east side has a connection to the downtown area that is real and shouldn't be discounted. It's probably more than the renter district, although that is an important aspect to it. There's been so much development in the central east side, and a lot more people are living there than just even 10 years ago, and I'm not quite sure where it'll be in the next 10 years. The Selwood Moreland area also has a connection to the west side, but perhaps for different reasons, and maybe it's more of a lifestyle. But there, at some point, if we're going to keep a west district, we're going to have somebody cross the river, whether or not they like it or not. But we're not trying to force people to cross the river. We're trying to draw a boundary. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Vincicle Robbins.
I just had two quick things. One is the conversations I've had to date with the Albina Vision Trust folks. I think there are some big concerns about the way this is drawn. So I think those are important conversations that we have to have. The other thing that I've been really struggling with, because as I was looking at all of the maps that pull across at the central, at the downtown and into the central east side, is I understand that there's a concentration of renters there, but I also think that there's potential that folks I'm not speaking about Commissioner Chisholm at this point, but some of the maps that have been submitted, I guess I've been struggling because the people who live in that area are not the people who run the businesses in those areas. Those people all live and vote in other parts of town. And so I'm trying to see whether the concerns of the renter population in those areas, and I agree that the renter population on the west side of the river in the Pearl and stuff is very different from the renter population going out Sandy Boulevard or whatever. I just not sure that if I was a renter in the inner Central East Side, I would feel like being part of this district, whether my voice was ever going to be heard, because I have basically, I now have all of some of the wealthiest parts of Portland, and where a lot of folks who own these companies or run these companies, or they're living not in rental apartments in the Central East Side. And so I just have been struggling with how that population is served by being in the West Side district, where I don't see that same thing if you look at adding Sellwood, Westmoreland, Eastmoreland, Reed, that whole block at the southern end of the east side of the river.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Judd, I know that you lowered your hand. I just wanted to double check if you had anything to add at this point.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, share the process and then also share the map that I created as well. And it wasn't not in the defense, but mine was Commissioner, it literally says Commissioner Judd on it. It was up further. One of the
So I might, in that case, I might pause you. And I'm
Okay.
gonna go to
Cool.
Commissioner Hanson first, because I think Commissioner Hanson, your map also had some similarities around the same themes. So then if you still want to share, we can have you present. And then Commissioner Judd will have you present. And then we'll probably take a break.
Yeah, I would love to. That sounds great. And Alex, if we could go to MPHV3. Thank you. So I actually made this map. I'm not here to pitch this map as the be all end all, but I'm so grateful for the conversation we just had, because I actually made this map to specifically be in conversation with Commissioner Chisholm's map for a lot of the same reasons that were just coming up in conversation. So you may notice this is basically copy pasted the East District from Commissioner Chisholm's map. But basically the question that I was really curious about after looking at a lot of these maps was, and as a context, I both rent and work, have done a lot of community work in the Lloyd neighborhood. So I'm very familiar with this part of town, lots of colleagues working in the Central East Side, and in the Central City. So my kind of guiding question for this map was, what if we did, as Commissioner Chisholm outlined, and kept the Central City together as outlined in the 2035 plan, and as was raised in some comments a moment ago, connected it with North and Northeast Portland. And so you'll see the aspects of the Central City are all connected here. And then Lloyd, because I think so we've got Lloyd and we've got Elliott, and kind of everything that is historic Albina is all connected and kind of runs the kind of channel north of renters. I have heard, overwhelmingly throughout this process, the public comment and in this group as well, about wanting to respect neighborhood boundaries. Albina is the one that I always think of, because I live and work in this area, as an example of a neighborhood that is not officially recognized by the city of Portland. So if we strictly follow neighborhood boundaries, you're not going to see it on the map, right? It's parts of Lloyd, it's parts of Elliott, it's parts of Boise. And so I think being mindful about this community of interest that is, because of historic racism, when neighborhood boundaries were being drawn, is not actually represented in the lines that we're seeing overimposed on the map. So all of that to say, that's what I was kind of playing with when I put this together in terms of the Central City portion. A couple of other pieces of this one, if you zoom out, Alex. Thank you so much. So this one, you'll see it pops over Sellwood, Moreland. I know Commissioner Baldini had said that in her mind, Cesar Chavez was a natural line. That is not reflected in this map. But here I also have Park Rose, all the school districts on the east side are connected. I would also, Alex, if you could flip to MPHV2, which is the one to the left. This is the other thing that I was playing with that basically has a really similar line for, again, once again, sort of the inquiry of what if the Central City was part of kind of North Northeast. But in this one, I have Park Rose is with the kind of northeast, but there's more of like Lentz in on the kind of bottom left of the East District. I again, like, absolutely defer to folks who've been talking with a lot of community leaders in East Portland about where those lines are drawn and like kind of what of Lentz and what of Parkrose is connected. But just wanted to share this one as the other alternative of what I had just kind of been thinking about. I think that's it. Thank you.
Commissioner Chisholm, did you have a question or comment on these maps?
Yes, I love that our maps are in conversation with each other. That's great. And I really appreciate the work that you did here. And I think it's a great model for our process forward of looking at each other's maps, trying to find the elements that we like of them and making other adjustments. This is exactly the iterative thing we're after. Excellent, thank you.
Commissioner Fleischman.
Yeah, I also have appreciated kind of how each one of these maps tries to address a particular set of issues or challenges we have. The challenge I have here, having lived in Northeast and now living in the flatland part of Northwest Portland, is that that kind of it seems like in order to carve out kind of the most central business part of downtown, there was a trade-off, which was to have to expand the kind of the southern part of the Eastern District. And that just, I have a hard time reconciling that. I spent a lot of time trying to think about the, like, what is that kind of core, whether it's a good idea or not, that kind of core of business, highly urban, kind of what people might think of as downtown and as an aggregated group. And this doesn't quite do it for me, because it takes this kind of this part on the west side and then connects it to a variety of areas which don't feel the same way to me and probably have a different set of issues. So like I tried to draw the line at 21st, and then I try to draw the line at 23rd to try to aggregate that. But then you ran into numbers issues around, well, you don't have enough of a population or on the west side. So that's where you wind up kind of adding on the southeastern side to make up for the population loss. And it felt a little artificial to me. Like I didn't see how it hung together. But again, I appreciate like seeing it to see what that challenge is.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you to the other commissioners who presented and commented on this one. So at this point, I think we're going to have Commissioner Judd close us out for presentations of maps this session. We will take a 5-minute break after Commissioner Judd presents, and if there are any comments, we'll hear those. And then we'll come back to try to just have a conversation to close out and discuss some of the themes that we've seen in the maps and some of the trade-offs that you have all highlighted as you've been presenting and deliberating. So Commissioner Judd, will you present for us and share yours?
Good evening, everyone. This should be really brief, and hopefully this is a great segue because, when I talk about the process I went through to kind of build this out, not because I'm wedded to it, but because I think that I try to be as objective as possible and make as few subjective decisions as possible, but be very aware of the type of subjective questions that we need to take to the community. And even in this discussion thus far, we've been really clear about some of the questions that become very apparent that we need to go to the community and get that feedback. As I'm talking to the community, what I was looking for were not what maps should be drawn, but how should we engage you to draw maps? What are the things that would help you draw maps? And being mindful of the fact that we're going to have a very finite amount of time to engage with the community members in these open discussions. And so the more subjective decisions we make in advance, the more time we're going to take to have to explain, defend, and perhaps the less time we have to listen and get the feedback necessary. And so what I attempted to do was just to be, I tried to be as agnostic as I possibly can in building out this. And so I use the filters, for example, the Census Bureau information, looking at the predominantly non-white race ethnicity filter, which gives us indications of where those housing developments are, where folks that are members of the Black, Brown, and Asian community exist, and being able to sort of look at natural breaks where that existed. Now, obviously, as we've already discussed, part of those natural breaks are driven by economic policies, historic economic policies. It's driven by, part of the economic policy includes where major thoroughfares are and how those communities were divided and how communities wind up on one side or the other. And so looking at the east side, those large populations of community members exist there. So it was a natural break. It appeared to be along some of those thoroughfares. The other one I did take a look at was, someone mentioned already, the renter occupied housing. By overlapping, so progressively going through the filters, again, the Census Bureau information being the first filter, looking at where the non-white race and ethnicity breaks were, looking at then layering on top of that, the owner renter occupied housing by Black group, then also immediate household income. What I began to see were natural breaks. The reason why that was important is because it's objective. I should be able to go back, and it's built off of recent studies done by different city commissions. So we should be able to go back and have that conversation, engage in the community, saying, look, here are the here are the things that are already established, not natural, but already established. Does this make sense to you? Where are areas that we need to consider? Then after that initial layer of Census Bureau, I then added on supplemental data, the city of Portland, the neighborhood districts. This gave me, for the majority communities, where, again, these currently defined neighborhood breaks were. So layer that on top of that Census Bureau information. Again, did it divide communities or did it keep communities together? What I actually saw was that a lot of these communities held together, even once you put those layers on top of one another. And then lastly, I looked at the supplemental data, including the equity index for PBOT. I also looked at the red line and the inequity project redlining across inequitable districts. Just to see where that information, where that would pop. Obviously, it followed a lot with the those disenfranchised Black and Brown communities of Portland as well. And so it did form sort of a natural pattern. I do note that one of the things I did do was to include St. John's as part of the West. The only reason why I did that is because, as someone pointed out in the comments, we do have a voting structure where we will be looking at having 3 different commissioners. And so that St. John's district, because it's so true, there's the northwest side of Portland is so dominated by Forest Park. There's not a lot of residents out there. So it did provide a sort of a break that could include them. And again, trying to be match populations, keeping that race and ethnicity, the inequities sorted by those sort of naturally defined or previously defined organizations, neighborhood organizations seemed important. So, but again, that's one of the questions. Where St. John's should be? That's obviously a question that we all have come across as something that we should take back to the community and get their feedback. I think these discussions we've had thus far, we are coalescing, which is good, because there seems like some comment so as we talk about in the next session, there are some natural themes or natural questions that we should be asking the community members, which seem to be repeating themselves. So I think that's a good thing. Lastly, the effort here was to go would be to go into these community engagement sessions with the most vanilla mapping as possible, have different scenarios off of that, just so that the conversation itself is provocative and we stir up feedback and have time for community members to give us where they believe the tensions in the community would be, or the sort of more alignment around those community interests exists. So it just was really to sort of be as vanilla as possible to provide the opportunity to get the feedback. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. And before we move into the next segment, are there any questions or comments for Commissioner Judd, Commissioner Lumley, and Commissioner Hanson? Then Commissioner Hanson.
Thank you. NAIA has an affordable housing development in the Portsmouth neighborhood. And so I have some familiarity with this community and have talked to some folks. I wouldn't say it's scientific by any means, but I believe that they would not be very happy about being split down the middle for this area here, and then having the St. John's area bumped in with the west side. And it's not necessarily being connected to the West Hills so much, where there isn't a lot of population, but it's being connected to this whole area. So yeah, I could be wrong. We should hear from more people. And if we present a map like this, I think we could good community feedback. But from my knowledge base, I don't think they would appreciate being split like this. But I am keeping an open mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Hanson?
Yeah, my one comment, I just wanted to express gratitude for that very last comment that you made, Commissioner Judd, about because it shifted the way that I'm thinking about this a little bit too, with just the really clean lines, that the point of this map, or these maps that we are coalescing on this month, is to have a handful to get really specific community feedback. And so it's less like now is the moment to have the perfect map, but more like which are the ones that will perhaps elicit the most like juicy feedback. So just wanted to like uplift that again and say thank you.
Juicy feedback will be an official term going forward. Let's use that. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Chisholm.
I just love that somehow we organically came up with maps that have a west side plus St. John's, west side plus Selwood, west side plus the central city. Not a whole west side district. We're finding we're discovering the questions that need to be answered, and that's fantastic. So thank you all.
Thank you. So at this point, we're going to break for 5 minutes. When we return, we'll have about 25 minutes left for discussion. So at this point, as you notice, we are not quite with the agenda, but you were already starting to coalesce around themes, so we let it go. When we come back, Commissioner Hanson is going to introduce the section, is going to remind us and review some of the considerations that have come up over recent meetings and in this meeting, and just kind of put on the table some kind of key decision points. This is a preview. We'll want to be thinking about just some of the things that came up were types and styles of maps that you may want to move out of contention and consideration at this point, as well as thinking about maybe the number of maps and any other kind of key decision points you want to discuss. So Commissioner Hanson will kick us off when we return, and we'll reconvene at 8:35. Commissioner Hanson, I did see you come off of mute. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to flag Commissioner Fleischman's comment in the chat about also wanting to present his map. And I would be happy to, I want to make sure that everyone who wants to can. So I think we can still go on the break, but then maybe have him present briefly and then do the wrap up.
Actually, Commissioner Fleischman, do you think you could present another? I know you presented earlier, but I think we can discuss another map. You can do it in about 2 minutes. Okay. And sorry, Alex, I know you stopped your screen share. Do you mind bringing that back up?
No problem.
Alex, when you bring it up, could you put the neighborhood and school district line layers on also?
Yeah, let me get to it. We're going to talk about this one, correct?
Core SD, yeah.
Yeah, the one thing I need to do is I'll show this map, and I will turn on the school district boundaries quick,
Mhm.
but what I can change for later discussions is right now the school districts also have like colored bill in
Okay.
the polygon, so it's kind of hard to see when they're overlapped.
it.
So let me
Okay.
turn them on so we can just see them, and then we'll switch back to your
Okay.
map.
Well, it's probably less important just to say I did follow the school district lines and making
Yeah.
sure that they corresponded to kind of keeping that in mind. The only reason that I wanted to show this is that it was a different way of dealing with a kind of a central district that largely, but not entirely preserved neighborhoods. And where I deviated from the neighborhood lines, it was kind of my understanding of kind of, as an example, in Mount Tabor, that the east side of the Tabor neighborhood is different than the west side in some ways, or even the southern side. But it again preserved. This one did preserve Mont Villa in kind of in an eastern district. And the other thing that it did was, I think it did preserve all of Lentz into one district. So it accomplished those goals, and kind of that the blue district is probably more than anything else kind of the historic kind of close in East Portland neighborhoods. So that's kind of how that followed. But it was just another effort to kind of place a central district. And again, the Sellwood and Moreland is connected to the west, but it's again stops at kind of the border with the Woodstock neighborhood. So
Thank you, Commissioner Fleischman.
Sure.
And I think that was helpful for also seeing a different way of thinking about the central city approach. And Commissioner Lumley, maybe.
Just real quickly, because I know people want to take a break. This map is an interest. I really appreciate the attempt here to do a central map that might work. In terms of communities of common interest, it does split the J district in a different way, almost in half north-south. And I would want to make sure that we have the input from the African American community about the north-northeast zone.
Yeah.
Albina neighborhood, but it's a very interesting map, and I want to thank you for presenting it.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Commissioner Lumley and Commissioner Fleischman. We're going to pause here. We will reconvene at 8:40. You're in an extra minute. But we will try to make sure our discussion is pretty focused when we come back. So, and as a reminder, all of these maps are also publicly available with a link that has all of the commissioners' maps. So we'll have those. We'll reshare that link as well. All right. See you in 5 minutes at 8:40. Okay, see folks on. Good, a few more seconds. Okay. Commissioner Hanson. Can I have you kick us off for the final discussion?
Absolutely. So as we were thinking about like how we wanted to kind of structure this meeting as the first of three like pretty critical ones in May, we thought that this last activity could be a like synthesis moment, a moment of actually kind of bringing together all of the various pieces that we've heard, right? So like over the last number of conversations, like we have these district criteria that we are making decisions around, and they have started to come to life in really exciting ways around certain streets and certain neighborhoods and certain boundaries and things. So as I said, we wanted to use a visual tool to synthesize this all in one place, like what the considerations are that we are all having top of mind as we are looking at different maps, as we are like reacting to them. So Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins mentioned towards the top of the call, like what are the forest conversations that we're having? And like, this is that, like, how do we put that all in one place so that we can continue to refer back to this, especially as we start to narrow. So the purpose of this is to list all of those, and then also similarly to help us like identify what additional gaps there are. Like once we put together this list, is there anything that we are not looking or that is not represented on here? We will add them, and hopefully it can be a give us some next steps in terms of additional people that we want to talk to, community leaders we want to reach out to. Exactly. So Commissioner Saxena, you are on top of things, because what we are going to do now is Sophia just dropped a Jamboard link in the chat. So Sophia and Diana, two awesome staff members, are going to have typed a bunch of things from tonight's conversation in this Jamboard already. And the invitation is, I think what we're going to do, well, I'll kick it over to Autumn to facilitate, but basically I'll read through it, and then if there are things that you see are missing, go ahead and type them in the Zoom chat so Sophia and Diana can transfer them over to the Jamboard. But we've got for folks who are audio only, like which eastern area should be incorporated to the west side, where should the river jump, like having St. John's feel more connected to the north, keeping Hayden Island intact. We talk about neighborhood associations, school districts, neighborhood coalitions, renters and corridors of that. The Jade District, especially looking at 82nd Street staying whole, thinking about the east side, what the boundaries are, especially along the north and along the south. Montevilla kind of boundaries, thinking about 82nd Avenue, thinking about historic Albina, thinking about Cully, 42nd was mentioned. Great conversation around Central City, keeping together, is it with west or north northeast? Is there a whole central district, major arterials, and then businesses or industrial districts? So so thank you for the notes in the chat. And I think the one other thing that I will say from like a framing perspective is, as we're also thinking about like multiple maps, if we do want to share multiple maps out, we can think about how some of these questions that, to Commissioner Judd's point, like we ourselves are not like having a collective opinion on, but rather like producing different options to elicit different reactions, can help kind of guide that. So Autumn, I'm going to kick it over to you to kind of like walk us through the rest of this.
Sorry, my control switched when I started screen sharing. So I'm screen sharing the Jamboard that is supposed to Commissioner Hanson's point, is supposed to kind of help to encapsulate some of the themes. We've also described these as some of the trade-offs or some of the big priorities and considerations that you want to factor in. So in the chat, and Diana and Sophia are busily adding elements. So we'll kind of focus there. Want to highlight a couple of, just have some bigger discussions. So just to summarize the themes, we're really talking about East Portland. So what constitutes East Portland? what does it mean to connect transit to the districts? And so really, what do boundaries look like? And what's the significance of physical boundaries or administrative boundaries, and also cultural and community boundaries? The kind of key questions of coalescing around, like, if there's a Western district, kind of where does that, where might that cross the river? And then, of course, some other specificity around communities of interest. And as a reminder, we've been talking about how communities of interest will start to have more information around what constitutes those as the process continues. So that's just a summary of where we are. Thank you for adding what's missing into the chat. So we're also going to want to consider two kind of key questions during this portion. Earlier, we looked at 4 styles of maps, that could be taken into consideration. So there were, Alex presented an analysis that had 4 quadrants with a central district in the middle. There was a style of a pinwheel where each of the districts touched. There were styles of patterns of bands, either running east to west or north to south. And then there are also 4 districts that are more functionally blocks, right? And so wanted to get a sense from the group of, are there certain types of maps that you may want to focus more of your attention on over the next 2 meetings in the month of May? And are there certain maps that you feel like as a general pattern just are not consistent with your objectives of your views at this time? So that'll be the first question. And then the second question that we'll try to maybe focus on towards the end is there a certain approach to either having one map that you'd like to propose and take into June and July, or would you like to consider multiple maps that maybe lay out different scenarios? So we'll start with the first question. And I am going to stop screen sharing as they're adding kind of elements just to kind of focus this. But I did want folks to see kind of what the Jamboard is shaping up like. So
Can you repeat the first question?
Yep. So for the first question, do you mind, Sophia, do you mind resharing the presentation from Flow Analytics that laid out the 4 themes that folks can see them? So there are essentially the styles of maps have tended to coalesce around 4 types, right? We saw pinwheel and we saw bands. There were, a central district, so having a central district, though the central district we saw in various maps that central district doesn't always mean center city, right? It can mean different things. And so at this point, are there certain types of maps that you kind of want to take off the table or put them to the side as you kind of focus on specific styles that may work best? We'll start with Commissioner Chisholm and Commissioner Lorente.
I guess I'm inclined to not think of this as an effort of like, what visual style should we put on or off the table, but rather focus our attention on the questions that we should have been talking about for the last little while here. Should there be one East Portland district or 2? If there's one, what does it consist of? Should there be one West Side district, or should part of West Side be split off? If it is one West Side district, what gets added, St. John's, Central, or Sellwood? Those seem to be the questions rather than like pinwheel versus bands. Like, so if I could just, this may be my suggestion in terms of focusing our conversation around the questions of the actual geography rather than the sort of the visual style of it.
Okay. Commissioner Lorente, followed by Commissioner Fleischman and Commissioner Manhattan.
Yeah, I would be in favor of us like temporarily suspending consideration of, pinwheel or band type maps, and instead maybe try to hone in on our future meetings and try to hone in on maybe a couple different versions of like a West Side Plus district or West Side Plus map that preserves an East Portland district, and maybe putting forward a couple different versions of that map that weigh different priorities along the borders. I'm sensing that we're, entertaining the idea of a central district, and maybe we can put forward a couple versions of that. So maybe that's how we channel our energy going forward, is just developing and deepening conversations around those two types of maps, and putting something forward that, in July, community members can sort of, affirm or push back on some of the elements of those borders, and that'll give us some good feedback on what we want to prioritize in that consideration.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I
Commissioner
entirely
Fleischman?
support, yeah, I entirely support what Commissioner Lorente just said.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Manjarres.
Yeah, I agree with what Commissioner Lynch just said, and would just challenge us. I think that it's important from an equity perspective and thinking about communities who have been historically underserved, underrepresented, underseen in these spaces, to really start from there in terms of how we think of prioritization. So like asking ourselves the question, and I put a very general question, but I think there are more specific questions about which communities we want to elevate through this process based on our, again, collective understanding of who's been historically underserved. And so I would say, I'm sorry, I'm like trying to track process, but for me, it's important that there be an East Side district. I think that the East Side has had a pretty consistent voice before this process and through this process that they want to be, they want an East Side district to be maintained, and they want to be able to work together. And so I think that's been a historically disenfranchised community that needs to be honored in that. And in terms of the details, right, of how we get there, I really appreciated the different versions of where folks who are working on that project really came to that, particularly Commissioner Fleischman's efforts with the Montevilla district and how it might sort of live in that space, and what happens, again, on the margins of those different communities. I would not be comfortable splitting up historically marginalized communities and historically folks who have been sort of the victims of, I would say, some intentional racism and systemic racism over the years. And so I would not support splitting up historically Black communities, for example, in the Albina district, and being very intentional about how we're not doing that. And then thinking about other ethnic minority groups that have, already said that who have already given us information about where their communities exist. So the Coley neighborhood and some of the communities that Commissioner Lumley brought forward, I think is really important to preserve. And then just thinking about, and this is the thing about renters and folks from low-income communities, is challenging ourselves really not to think about communities as a monolith, right? And so when we're talking about low-income communities on the East-West side, low-income communities in the downtown region versus other parts of the city, I think in as much as we can start thinking of, here's the option we put forward, who's at risk of being marginalized through this process, and really like challenge ourselves to ask those questions, I think will get us closer to a good answer. And having really honest conversations with the community. Like, I don't want to alarm the community too. So I did hear something about like, let's elicit like feedback, and there's some things that are going to make folks feel a visceral, stressed out response. And we don't want people engaging from a stressed out place. And so I think if there are areas where we can actually just like in good faith put forward maps that feel like they honor those sort of general like parameters, and then give people the opportunity to really give us the details, I think that would be really great.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kimura.
Thank you. I also think it's very important, at least for me. I can't speak to people in Sellwood or Albina, except kind of tangentially what I've heard. But I think it's important for us to listen to that community group separately. I will say that realistically, not everybody's going to be happy, but I think we are all trying to do the best we can. The other thing is, I would like to have at least 2 or 3 versions to present so that people see that this is not like a monolithic structure that we pushed out, that we have differences of opinion, and there is a lot of wiggle room that that we are actually asking for their information, because I think the involvement of the information eliciting is almost more critical than the actual information itself. Anyway, at least that's my opinion. So thank you very much for all of the, yes, we do have differences in competing maps, but I think that's not bad either. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Lumley. Commissioner Lumley, your microphone is off.
And did it again. I appreciate Commissioner Chisholm's comment about we're not looking at map styles, looking at the values, which is true, which is why earlier I said that the map designs that are sort of pinwheel shaped or in bands don't seem to fit very well with the criteria that we're using. And so that said, I think it would be good progress for us today to say that we're not going to move forward with those style maps, because we have to start narrowing it down. And when we get to the next meeting on May 17th, we really should have some maps that are really serious maps that we're going to consider as the final options. And I've heard different ranges, but certainly no more than 5 maps that we will present to the public for comment. It does sound to me like map styles that include 3 districts that include the southern border, and the map styles that include sort of a central area are still being considered. So those might be the styles we would consider moving forward. And I don't think we have the time to do a poll vote, but I don't know if anybody objects to this approach, but maybe we could get to a point where we're making a decision so we can advance to the next meeting.
I do have a thought on that, but Commissioner Lumley, Commissioner Chisholm. Yeah.
Quick process question, Autumn. So the maps that we select on May 31st are the maps that will be the subject of the July hearings. There's no opportunity in June to change those. It's May 31 goes to July. And we are obligated by law, like the charter reform, to do 2 hearings in each of the 4 districts. So if we have 5 maps, we might have a lot more than 8 meetings, right?
So Sophia, okay, so I think this is what Sophia was trying to get to. So to answer your first question, yes, the requirement is that the maps that you'll vote on to take, that there needs to be a month between you voting on the maps as essentially draft plans and the actual hearings. Now, functionally, you need to have 2 meetings in each district. I suppose theoretically, so what Sophia was trying to articulate, I believe, is that at some point you may get to such a narrow amount of overlap that yes, feasibly, you actually have to have more than 8 sessions. But theoretically, as long as there's enough overlap functionally within the map, they'll work to find a representation across those maps where you have 2 meetings. And then, of course, in general, this is just what I've observed. The discussion seems to be coalescing more around 2 to 3 maps. If there are 5, it just hasn't seemed to come up at that point. But you're the commission.
I guess I'd be
concerned how to
concerned
approach it.
if we have 4 or 5 maps. Yeah, you could find 2 locations in each district, but that would almost by definition mean you'd be so far away. West Side District, Garden Home is going to be in the West Side District. And so we could do all of our hearings in Garden Home, but that doesn't help us because the people who are in the overlap areas we're debating live in St. John's or Selwood, right? So I'd want to sort of narrow ourselves down to perhaps two maps, I think.
Yes, and of course, and just from probably a community engagement best practice, probably the maps that you'd actually want the public and members of the community to really engage with, and having something that is approachable and accessible. Just, yeah. Okay. And Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins, followed by Commissioner Fleischman. And then we'll probably need to wrap after those comments.
I was just going to say, after looking at all of the maps that we've been looking at tonight, I think that there's a way to find locations that allow us to keep it to 8 of the meetings. And I agree with what folks are saying about trying to narrow down to, one or two central conceptual central district maps, and a couple that have maybe look at had different ways that the east boundary might be drawn, or how the lower part of southeast can be incorporated into the west side. I'm not here. I personally think that trying to pull St. John's over into the west side would be a non-starter for me. I don't think there's a good way to divide it, but I'd be willing to talk more about that at the next meeting if there's some more thoughts on that.
Commissioner Fleischman?
Yeah, I'd appreciate coming back to the conversation when we get clear around the logistics of how we're going to do this. Because as I read the plan, we're actually presenting one map that we're presenting a map where there's 4 districts labeled here District A, B, C, and D, and having 2 hearings in each one of those designated districts in order to get feedback. How we do that might be really interesting. We might have one map and then 2 alternatives to say, well, would you prefer this or would you prefer that? But it seems to me, at least from what I'm reading about the established process, that we would be going out with one map. So let me pose, for example, the issue of St. John's. Let's say we had 2 maps, and in one St. John's was connected to a western district, but another one it was connected to a northern district. I don't know how you would have a meeting in one meeting. It would be like, come to the meeting where you're in the northern district, and then the other time it would be come to the meeting where you're in the western district. I don't quite understand how we would define what District A, B, C, or D would be unless we actually decided that this was the map that we're going out with. I'm leaving that to not to discuss today, but to say, I think we need to get greater clarity on that question.
We can definitely come to the table to discuss how it would work. The objective would be to have representation within each of the potential districts as they're reflected, right? And so yes, without speaking theoretically, it's hard to speak theoretically about what could happen, but we would work to make sure that there is representation, there's access, and that the meeting points are distributed both in terms of time in the week and days and for accessibility, but also locations throughout the city. But the commission, this is our understanding, the commission under measure 22668. Sorry, it's too late. Under the ballot measure, under the charter reform, you are able to take multiple plans to the community. And so what we would do is work to make sure that the meeting locations themselves are consistent with the language and that is legally sound. Commissioner Lumley.
Thank you. I'm not on mute this time. The goal is to get some direction for the May 17th meeting. And so I just want to focus on that. If we can't do that tonight, then I would recommend that we have another meeting on May 27th, because I think I would say we are substantially not on track. But if we could just focus the rest of our conversation here and how we provide that additional guidance, I think it would be helpful.
So the number of maps is the exact number of maps, and Commissioner Baldini wrote this in the chat as well. There's no need to decide on a hard number of maps tonight, right? We've had a discussion though around the strategy, around whether like multiple maps or one maps seems to be the appropriate approach. And right now there seems to be a general preference or general consensus around staying open to multiple maps. Okay, that's where we are now. There's been discussion around having those maps reflect different strategies and approaches and being able to have members of the community respond to them. For the next meeting, we'll really need to focus in on what those kind of key decision points and what those maps essentially reflect while being viable maps, right? They meet all of the requirements. And the other kind of key question is, I know that we've just talked about not eliminating certain styles of maps visually, but there does seem to be two types of maps that generally violate, that tend to violate some of the operating principles. And to summarize them, they are bands that either run east to west or north to south or east to west. And they tend to violate the principles because they end up splitting some of these communities that the vast majority of the commission has stated that they want to keep whole. For instance, East Portland or the Western District. And often it's because those bands just go so far to the east or west or north or south for the city. And then the pinwheel tends to do the same thing because of the way they split. It's not to say every map, those are just big buckets. But in general, as we're giving direction to flow, is there any opposition to us having them focus on other styles of maps that do not split, kind of generally speaking, an east and a west district? Is there any opposition to that? Okay. Now, again, it doesn't have to be a pinwheel to do that, right? But those tend to do that. And so we'll have them focus their efforts on analyzing those potential maps, taking into account the feedback and the considerations you've included on the Jamboard. And we'll work on shaping the agenda to kind of start to hone in on these strategies and really narrow that focus and really start to think about those scenarios that you want to see reflected on the map as we near the end of May. Now, I do have a question for the co-chairs. Would you like to schedule a meeting for the 27th, either tentatively? Let's start with tentatively.
I will jump in and say, I think that it was the 24th that we had penciled
Oh,
it.
sorry, the Wednesday. Yeah, you're right.
And for context, we had talked, yeah, we had raised that as an option. I know Commissioner, I feel like we're probably on track to not have that, like an additional, a fourth meeting in May, based on, I thought we were kind of coalescing some, the idea between having that, putting that additional meeting on the calendar was like, in case we needed like more time all to collectively talk so that we could reach a decision point on X number of maps by the end of the May 31st meeting. Commissioner Lumley, I know you disagreed and I see another hand up, so I'll be curious.
Commissioner Lumley, do you want to add anything? And then we'll go to Commissioner Manjarres.
I think we're getting very close to making some progress here. We just haven't crossed the line yet. And then if so, then I don't think we will need additional meeting, but we could tentatively schedule it just to be on the safe side. So it's on everybody's calendars for May 24th. I was thinking about a motion to focus map consideration that meet our criteria that generally are designed with maps that have 3 districts with the southern border and maps that have a central district. So in other words, I'm not discounting this pinwheel maps or the bands. I'm just saying that moving forward, we're going to focus on the kinds of maps that meet our criteria.
Thank you, Commissioner. Before we consider the motion, I do want to hear from Commissioner Manjarres. Commissioner Manjarres.
Yeah, so I just wanted to hear, as folks are thinking about the design for the next meeting and how we get to a point where we can actually get to some specific maps that we have to decide on by the 31st. I would recommend if we could have, I do think we're starting to coalesce. So I do think you're correct in that we just need to make some decisions about like what's gonna like be presented next time. And it seems like we have a universe right now, right? So we shouldn't add more is like my first hope. So we don't add more than what we heard today. I do think there's a general theme. And so getting some that are close, maybe not exact, and sort of deciding on one, and again, would leave it to the chair's discretion and the team who are working here to pull that together. Having decision points that we can go through and using polling so that we can say like, okay, here's the set, starting with the broadest set of considerations which is the criteria, right? These are the ones that set the criteria. Do we feel like it meets criteria? Okay, move to the next one. So having a process like that to get us even more narrow in our next conversation would be really, really helpful, because I think some of the questions that are showing up in the Jamboard, if that could be sort of oriented into or organized into decision points that we can be pulled on, that would be really helpful. Because I feel like the questions are living in different places. So I'm just offering that as like just going through so that we can start to funnel a little bit would be really helpful. And I do think that on the 17th, if we still have 20 maps that we're looking at, then we're probably not going to have, this ready by the 31st. I don't imagine that's going to be the case, but I think that sort of process of having decision points that we can work through as a group would be really helpful, and trust you all in designing based on what we offered today, sort of what those questions might look like. And even sending it to the group in advance so folks can give feedback on it before we get here would be really helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner. And we will take that feedback into consideration as we set the agenda with the co-chairs. So, Commissioner Chisholm.
One quick clarification, Commissioner Monjaras. I like the idea of narrowing our scope rather than expanding our universe. That said, I would love to be able to take my map, for example, and tweak it based on a lot of the feedback we've heard today, and sort of amend it, if you will, before we bring it back for another consideration. I assume you're fine with that.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I think it was Commissioner Lorente who mentioned, like, I feel like we have the general sort of east side map, west side map. Are we pulling? There's general theme maps, but we don't need 5 maps that are trying to do the same thing, right? With a few little tweaks. We need folks to decide on a couple that we can consider, and the community is going to change that. So I think we need to figure out what we can agree on as a group, understanding that it's going to change through the process. And so if it is a central map that, again, if it's Commissioner Hanson and Commissioner Chisholm's map, sort of like a hodgepodge of that in some way, that's totally fine. But I think not adding a third option to the 2 we just saw, for example, would be really important. And again, I think in the presentation, making sure that we're clear. So everybody today, for example, and I think this was the right process and approach, is like everybody was walking through sort of how they got to these maps, which is really important because we got to hear the thought process. A lot of pros embedded in that. Folks have a perspective, and that's really important. I think now that we have that, framing them into a similar structure where we can look at the pros and cons, like again, starting with, do they meet this set of criteria, and layering in sort of what they're doing in a consistent format would help me personally just sort of track them and like look at them together. And I think that takes a little bit of legwork before the 17th, but I think everything I heard today, I feel like it would allow us to get there so that we can start moving and funneling in a little bit based on the criteria that we think is important.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Lumley, I know that you had a motion that you've made. Did you want to follow up with that?
Yeah, I'm going to put it in the chat room. It's actually a proposed motion right now, just because I want people to think about it before we make the motion. If there's any reaction to this.
Okay, there's a proposed motion in the chat, but I'm going to read it out loud as well. The proposed motion is to focus the map consideration going forward on that which meets our criteria, generally are designed to be maps that have three districts with a southern border and maps that have a central district.
So before I formally make a motion like that, I just want to get some reaction to this before we start going on the public record with it. So is there anybody out there that would like to amend it, a friendly amendment of some kind? Or would you rather make the motion than do an amendment?
Okay. Any opposition to?
I'm sorry, can we clarify? I don't think I'm fully understanding the motion. So 3 districts with the southern border. Can you just clarify what you mean by that?
It would be the west side, the east side, and then the middle one. So it keeps the west side whole, the east side whole, although knowing that we're going to have to cross over a little bit over the Willamette, and then a northern district. It's that first grouping of maps that that said maybe.
Or put another way, we're eliminating districts where there's only 1 district that touches the southern border of the city, or that have 4 districts that touch the southern border of the city. We're talking about is 3, or central would make it 2. Right?
You know, I thought about going that route, which is what I actually verbalized earlier, but I did this more as a positive way of saying we're going to focus on this and not say which ones we're not going to consider, because we don't know what we're going to hear from the public. We might get something that might ask us to reconsider. So this is more it's a positive way of looking. These are the ones we're going to focus on instead of saying these are the ones we're not going to consider anymore.
So generally speaking, just to kind of keep the terminology the same. So these are styles of maps that meet that general approach, right? Having 3 districts that touch the southern border of the city. However, you can also see that within these maps, there's also a variation of style where you do have a kind of a district in the middle. Also, it kind of does both, right? Where there are going to be districts surrounding it. And then the other style of map, and this is that version, just with more emphasis on a central map. And for instance, in this example, in the bottom right corner, there are only 2 districts, but there's that central district. So
Yeah, so if I could just add, the central district theme is not one that I support. I think there are problems here with our existing criteria. But it seemed like there were several commissioners that still wanted to consider that. So I want to keep an open mind with those.
and we will need to wrap because we are over time. So I do want to be cognizant of that. Commissioner Hanson, do you have any other comments to wrap us up?
I propose an amendment to the motion that have 2 to 3 districts with the southern border, which is a positive way of saying what Commissioner Chisholm said of not 0, not 1 and not 4.
Okay.
I actually don't want that. Sorry, I don't want to make that amendment. I like the 3 districts, the two districts that are covering the southern border. I think.
Here's what we'll do.
That is
We-
basically the central districts. The central districts actually do that. The central district maps actually have 2 that are on the southern border.
So, as a reminder, we use modified consensus for most decisions. This is one that includes it. So if there's any opposition to this framing of the motion, we'll do a roll call vote. If it's if I have a formal motion. So Commissioner Lumley, would you like to make a formal motion?
Yeah, I just wanted to say to Commissioner Hanson that I hear what you're saying, but I do think the central district theme does get to the 2 districts in the southern border.
And my
Because you would
comment-
have to if you had a central district.
I totally hear that. One of the maps that I had submitted has 2 on the southern border that does not have a central district. So I just wanted to offer 2 to 3 in order to expand the options a bit.
Okay. Then I'll accept that amendment. Motion to focus map consideration that meet our criteria that generally are designed to be maps that have 2 to 3 districts with the southern border and maps that have a central district.
I'm happy to second as amended.
I see a second. Is there any opposition to the motion as presented by Commissioner Lumley to have the focus of the consideration going forward on maps that meet our criteria and are generally designed to be maps of 2 to 3 districts with the southern border and maps that have a central district? Any opposition to the motion as presented? Okay. With that, the motion passes, and that is where we'll focus. We'll be shaping the agenda. We will focus the discussion on that going forward. And we will also be kind of clear about enumerating some of these decision points that you've discussed today and really just honing in on trying to get maps that are viable for the group in the next meeting. Okay. I do apologize that we went over. We did cover a lot today, and I really do want to thank you for your time, thoughtfulness, and intentionality. Even outside these meetings, you've all been busy. So thank you for your service. And thank you to members of the public who are observing tonight. Actually, we do have one more. Technically, Adam, can you go to our last slide?
So we do have our next meeting. It is May 17th from 6 to 9 p.m. We'll have another meeting that's hybrid, which will be via Zoom. We'll also have the in-person meeting at the Portland Building in room 108, and that is on the first floor of the Portland Building. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight, and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I'm planning to go on the 17th in person if anyone else wants to join. It'd be fun.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Bye, good night.